How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is What If Deku Had a Leveling System, the movie. And now, before we begin, I would just like to ask you all to please consider subscribing, as it really does help this channel out, and it took me quite a while for me to just make this series in general. Sit back, relax, and enjoy, and now, let's begin. The cries and screams of a baby echo throughout a hospital room as a doctor hands this child over towards its mother. As the mother smiles down, the child, they know that the coming days can only go up from there. However, this isn't our green-haired protagonist. 5 years after this event, of this dull blue-haired baby being born, our green-haired hero would finally be born, as the doctor hands over Izuku over towards his mother, Inko Midoriya. Years would end up passing as we now see a 4-year-old Izuku sitting up in his bedroom, just sitting in his bed as all of a sudden his alarm goes off as he flies up from his bed, completely now awake. He was still drowsy and just a little bit not there, as he was still quite sleepy. However, the anticipation and excitement that was Izuku's birthday was flooding Izuku's mind, and as soon as his alarm clock rang, Izuku would jump up out of his bed, pulling the covers off of him before running over towards his mother's room, pounding on the door. "Mom, Mom!" Izuku would yell, as his mother would slowly open the door, sleepily looking down at Izuku. "What, Izuku?" she would say, yawning in the process. "It's my birthday! Can we finally go to the quirk doctor's office? I can't wait to see what my quirk is!" Izuku would say, jumping and jittering all throughout, as he was insanely excited, as his mother would look softly at him before laughing. "Oh, Izuku, it's still quite early. The quirk doctor's office doesn't open for another hour," Inka would say, looking at one of the clocks in the hallway. Izuku would look down sadly before saying, "Oh, can you at least make breakfast first? It is my birthday after all," he would say, completely excited. He loved his mother's cooking and he wanted the best of the best for his birthday. Inka would just laugh, saying, "Of course, Izuku. I'll be down in a minute," she would say, shutting the door to go get changed out of her pajamas, as Izuku would rush down the stairs before sitting at the kitchen table, just jumping up and down in his seat, completely excited for what the day had to bring going on forward. It could only go up from there, Izuku would tell himself. As all of this would end up happening, Inko would walk down the stairs, making Izuku's favorite breakfast, as finally, the hour would pass as Inko would set up an appointment before driving Izuku off towards the quirk doctor's office, placing him in the car as they would then drive off. "What do you think my quirk's going to be?" Izuku would excitedly ask, as his mother would only go silent. That's quite the question, Izuku. Your father has a fire quirk, and I have a telekinesis quirk. So maybe a stronger fire telekinesis quirk, maybe? You could definitely become a hero with something like that, don't you think?" she would say, as Izuku would pump his fist in the air, excitedly yelling, "Yeah!" As they would pull up into the doctor's office, as she would park the car, getting Izuku out of his car seat before walking him into the doctor's office, sitting him down before saying that they were here to just the clerk sitting in the front of the office. As a couple minutes would end up passing, the doctor would open the doors, looking down at a clipboard. Izuku Midoriya, can you please follow me?" he would say, as Inko and her child would stand up before walking off to go to the quirk doctor's office with the quirk doctor. As Inko and Izuku would sit down now in a private room, the doctor would take a couple of tests before going off to just do some sampling and all of that, just to try and find out what Izuku's quirk could possibly be, and even if he does have a quirk. However, they don't have quite the technology just yet to get a precise, just exact answer on what Izuku's quirk is going to be, meaning it will most likely just awaken in the coming days after Izuku turns 4. All they know is that they can test to see, taking some x-rays and blood samples, just to see if Izuku has a quirk or not. 5 minutes would end up passing as the doctor would come in smiling or leaning back up against the door after shutting it. "Well, I have great news, you two," the doctor would say, making Izuku jump up and down, shaking the seat, as his mother would place a hand on his shoulder, just as if signifying that she wants him to calm down. As he would be shaking in his seat, the doctor would then laugh. "Young Izuku here does have a quirk. We don't know what exactly his quirk will be. My guess is a mix between his father and your quirk, Inko. However, our guess might not always be right, of course. It could be possibly anything. If he gets lucky, it could be a crazy powerful quirk like All Might's, or if he doesn't, he could get a weaker kind of quirk, like a very weak telekinesis quirk. Not trying to, just make you mad or anything, Inko. You didn't really get the luck of the draw." "Yeah, I know," Inko would say, smiling, happy that her son had a quirk, as Izuku would jump in the air, pumping both his fists up. "Yeah, I have a quirk," he would excitedly exclaim, as his mother would just laugh. "You do have a quirk, Izuku," she would say before reaching down as if wanting Izuku to grab her hand as Izuku would do so. So they would then walk off, where Izuku would then get back in the car, where they would then drive off back towards their house, where Izuku would then have one of his happiest birthdays, with him now knowing he's going to have a quirk. The next day, Izuku would end up walking into class, as he would end up seeing Bakugo Katsuki being surrounded by a bunch of other people in his preschool class. Izuku would end up asking one of them what all of the deal was, as they would end up exclaiming that Bakugo has awakened his quirk. Izuku would jump up, just trying to look over everyone's shoulders and heads, where he would end up seeing Bakugo Katsuki sitting there in the middle with his palms facing up, with sparks flying out of his hands. As he would look down excitedly on towards them, Izuku would end up yelling, "Whoa, you have such an amazing quirk, Bakugo!" He would yell, as many of the other preschoolers and Izuku's friends around him would end up agreeing with him. Some of them would end up turning to Izuku and asking him what his quirk is. However, Izuku would only shake his head. "The doctor said I have a quirk, I just haven't awakened it yet." Many of them would nod their heads in understanding, as many of them haven't even just gotten their quirks awakened yet either. When Izuku would end up going home, he would end up walking up to his room to read book, as he would end up sitting there reading a book, where he would end up seeing just a screen flash above the screen, where it would end up saying his intelligence had leveled up. As Izuku looked down at it, just wondering what that meant, before an entire screen would end up popping up, showing all of his stats and his overall level. His overall level was 2, and his intelligence stat was 2 as well. Izuku would look at it, just intrigued by it, before saying, "Wait, this is my quirk." He would run downstairs yelling, "Mom, I awakened my quirk." He would yell as his mother would look questioning on towards Izuku, as Izuku would say, Look, there's a screen in front of me." He would say, as Inko would up asking Izuku, "What do you mean? There's no screen there." And she would look on exactly where Izuku was pointing, however, there was nothing there at all. Izuku would end up sitting down in frustration, wondering why his own mother couldn't see his quirk. However, Inko would end up just sort of laughing. "Izuku, don't be frustrated. It just must be a quirk that others can't see, only you can." Izuku would say, "Yeah, you must be right. This quirk looks awesome," Izuku would say, completely mesmerized by all of the different understandings and words all throughout this page right in front of Izuku. However, Izuku just didn't fully understand all of it. You gotta remember, Izuku's only 4 at the time. So Izuku is going to end up just clicking random buttons, experimenting with his power, looking for different things, and just trying to look to see what his quirk fully is. Izuku would end up accidentally clicking on a just sidebar that would end up being labeled as quests. When Izuku would click this, all of a sudden a bar would end up popping up saying achievement unlocked, saying that he had just unlocked a quest. And so Izuku would look at the quest, seeing that it was called a daily quest, meaning Izuku was going to have to complete it daily, or else he would end up getting negative XP. Izuku would, or just negative XP, causing him to level up just backwards and causing him to lose levels, just sort of as an extra motivation to level up even further. Izuku would look at this, reading it intently, as he was quite the smart four-year-old. However, he wasn't no genius. He was still quite smart, as his mother had him reading books all the time, so he could read fluently. However, he might not understand what a lot of words might mean. So Izuku was reading this, he would end up seeing that he had to do just certain challenges for this daily quest to be complete, and he'll get a certain amount of XP that will most likely level him up. As Izuku would be reading it, it would end up saying that he has to do 10 push-ups, 10 sit-ups, 10 squats, and 10 jumping jacks. It would end up seeming quite easy to most of us. However, Izuku's only 4 years old, and this would be quite challenging to him. Izuku would end up looking questioningly on towards his mother before asking her what a push-up is, as Inko would end up just saying, "Oh, here, let me show you," as she would just demonstrate, as Izuku would continue on asking what these certain things were, as she would end up just demonstrating them for Izuku. As Izuku would end up just pointing down where his screen was, forgetting that his mother couldn't see it. "My quirk says I have to do 10 of those every single day," or something like that. Inko would look on towards Izuku in a questioning manner before just saying, "Okay, why don't you go ahead and begin?" She would say, giving Izuku his tennis shoes, as he would end up putting them on and tying them, as Izuku would end up completing the exercise, or Izuku's exercise shoes, or his just daily shoes, whatever you want to call them. So as Izuku would end up putting those on, he would complete them, as Izuku would end up seeing he leveled up even further. His strength had leveled up, and he was now level 3 in strength, and his defense had leveled up to level 2, tying with his intelligence. As would be happening, Izuku would end up seeing that his overall level was 5. Izuku would smile, just getting a sense of accomplishment. As years would end up passing, we now see a 10-year-old Izuku stretching, being prepared to go out and do some more exercises. He had gotten to the point now that he had to do 100 sit-ups, 100 push-ups, 100 just squats, and just even more, like 100 jumping jacks and other types of exercises, a 10-mile run, all of that, which seems quite hard for a 10-year-old, but Izuku has gotten his strength stats and all of his other stats to be quite high, and so he was quite the strong 10-year-old, making it quite easy for Izuku to complete this. However, that 10-mile run was a pain in the butt every single day for Izuku. So every time he would barely be wobbling and it just completely tired. However, Izuku turned out to have quite the stamina because of this. And now Izuku also made sure not to leave out his intelligence either, reading books every single day and also watching educational videos. His mother made sure that he did that and not to skip out on it. So with that, Izuku would end up completing that quest for the day. However, we end up cutting to see that same dull blue-haired boy that we saw at the start of this What If. We see him walking down the street, going under a bridge, as all of a sudden a sewer drain would explode out of nowhere, sending it flying up, hitting the roof of the bridge, or the bottom of it, that is, the roof to the boy that was under it, as all of the sudden sludge and ooze would end up coming right out of the sewer, piling out before finally 2 eyes would end up materializing out of nowhere. "Ah, what do we have here?" the sludge monster would say, as the boy would only look on in complete shock. "Who are you?" he would say questioningly. "Oh, please, I don't Time to bother with your useless questions. You're gonna help save me from that stupid yellow-haired hero," he would say, launching himself towards the blue-haired person that was known as Shigaraki. As Shigaraki would end up trying to get out of the way, the sludge villain would end up just capturing him in its sludge, sending sludge going right down into his system, trying to take a hold of his body. However, before that could fully happen, All Might would appear out of nowhere, launching himself up out of the sewer before punching the sludge away from Shigaraki. As Shigaraki would look on in complete shock and amazement at who was now All Might, the #1 hero, standing in front of him. As Shigaraki would look on in complete shock and excitement, he would remember how he had a question for All Might. As All Might would collect all of the sludge villain into a 2-liter bottle, Shigaraki would finally ask All Might the question that he'd been meaning to ask him. All Might, do you think I could become a hero even if I have a villainous quirk? Shigaraki would say, as he would end up looking around him before grabbing just a can of Sprite or something that was lying on the ground. Before touching it with all 5 fingers, it would end up disintegrating. All Might would look down at Shigaraki's power before thinking for a moment. Your power, young man, it's quite the dangerous one, I assume. The fact that you can disintegrate anything just by touching something with 5 fingers. I fear you might accidentally hurt or kill someone, even. I would suggest staying out of the heroes, or just staying out of the hero career. It might be too dangerous for others. Sure, you could become a hero with it, but I just think it'd be too dangerous. I would suggest otherwise, All Might would say before jumping off, as Shigaraki would look on in shock before clenching his fists. I'll show you, All Might. I'll show you. As Shigaraki, from that day, would end up having an undying hatred against All Might. As how dare All Might say he couldn't become a hero? How dare he? I can become a hero. I can, Shigaraki would tell himself, as 10 months from that day would end up passing, as we now see the blue-haired boy stretching in front of the UA campus, as he would end up taking the written exam, and would then take the hero exam, which would be the same exam Izuku had taken in canon My Hero Academia. As this would be happening, Shigaraki would rush out into the city, easily destroying the robots using his disintegration quirk, easily touching all 5 of the robots, or just all the robots with his 5 fingers, dodging many of their attacks. Remember, they are robots and not designed to hurt anyone. So Shigaraki would rack up points and points, as he would end up passing the UA entrance exam, making it even into Class 1A, with his teacher being Shota Aizawa. So, we now cut to 6 months after Shigaraki made it into UA. They had really done many combat fighting with their quirks, mostly just training their quirks to become more powerful and more powerful. They hadn't done a one-on-one with their quirks just yet, mostly doing fistfights without them. So we now see Shigaraki standing in front of a hero wannabe. As the match would end up beginning, Shigaraki would launch himself towards him before placing all 5 fingers around his body, as it would end up disintegrating further and further, as Shigaraki just wouldn't be able to stop. As he would end up holding it, he would let go, as the boy would end up clenching his stomach in pain, walking backwards before falling down to the ground, as Aizawa would rush in, calling for Recovery Girl, who would come in, grabbing the boy and healing him as much as she could. However, the boy wouldn't ever be the same again, having who put up the gloves or the shoes, not being able to continue on his just bout to becoming a hero. He just couldn't anymore. He was too injured, and he would never be the same after Shigaraki ended up injuring him. And so Shigaraki would be seen sitting in the principal's office as Nezu would look down at Shigaraki. I'm sorry, Shigaraki, But you're expelled from UA. You can't be injuring students like that. You almost killed him. What would the press think? What would the parents think if you killed someone? I just can't take that risk anymore, Shigaraki. That's why I'm expelling you from UA. And as you would say, as Shigaraki would clench his fists before slamming the chair back behind him, shattering it into tiny pieces of wood, as he would end up walking through the door, slamming it further, before looking back at Nezu or pointing at him. You'll regret this, Shigaraki would say, as he would end up putting his hand to his forehead, as Shigaraki would end up slamming the door behind him. Nezu couldn't help but feel that he had made a very bad mistake. He just didn't know why. As that would be happening, Shigaraki would end up rushing out of UA, where All For One would end up meeting him. The Darth Vader wannabe would look down at Shigaraki before offering him a hand, asking him if he wanted to join him. All he wanted to do was become a hero, and yet the society rejected him. They couldn't accept him for who he was, with his villainous quirk, and so why not show them by becoming what they'd said he'd become all along? As Shigaraki would end up taking this hand, joining sides with the villain, not understanding what he had done, just accepting a contract that he wouldn't want to continue on later down the line. We cut back to the 10-year-old Izuku continuing on leveling up, gaining up his stats, as he would even purchase some weapons, like a certain sword that had just demonic energy to it, so if Izuku were to slash you, it would just not be able to heal, completely stopping any type of healing at all from it. Or it could also have a blood drain effect, so if you were to, say, cut off someone's finger, an endless stream of blood would end up flowing out of that wound until you were to be just dry of all blood, being killed by it. However, Izuku could cancel this effect by putting the sword away. As long as he had the sword out, the effect would continue. Izuku was also able to purchase another sword, which was an angelic sword / katana, which if you were to slash you in sort of an injury, it wouldn't injure you, however, it would heal you. However, this only goes to such an extent, and that injury can only sort of heal other injuries that have been done by a sword that Izuku has purchased, basically making the angelic sword useless unless Izuku was training with someone with the demonic sword and he had to heal someone. Otherwise, it's just a normal katana that Izuku can use. However, Izuku wouldn't like to use these types of swords as was insanely hard to handle. Izuku could barely wield them. Izuku couldn't even wield them at 10. Sure, he had been able to purchase them, that's because he saved up his coins to buy them. However, Izuku couldn't even hold them yet, and so 4 years / 5 years would end up passing, and Izuku would still barely be able to hold them, even after growing a crap ton. Izuku was at around level 65, and the max level would be around 100, which in order to do that, you would have to do crazy amounts of quests that only someone who, say, was possibly 30 or 40 with this power could achieve. So a 15-year-old Izuku wasn't going to be able to get close to it. Remember, the levels get slower and harder to get as time passes. However, that doesn't mean Izuku's stats aren't going to be high at all. They aren't going to be as high as that. Izuku can level up his strength stat, defense stat, way above 100. They can go way higher than that. However, his level maxes out at 100, while the stat lines max out at 200. So Izuku can level up even further than that through his stats. And so we now see a 14-year-old Izuku walking into the UA campus, as all of a sudden his foot would catch on a rock, as his head would flick back before falling down onto the ground, as a young net-haired girl would end up touching Izuku on the back, as Izuku would end up seeing that he was just floating in mid-air. He would end up looking around just in complete shock, as she would end up saying something after putting all of her fingertips together. Izuku would hear a loud release be yelled as he would end up hitting down the ground, except it wouldn't be as hard as it would have been if Izuku just wasn't stopped. So Izuku would end up looking back before thanking the girl, putting out his hand as she would end up taking the handshake, shaking it, as Izuku would end up speaking. "Oh, hello, I'm Izuku Midoriya. Thanks for saving me back there," Izuku would say as the girl would only just laugh. "Yeah, I'm Chaco Uraka. It's no problem," she ended up saying. Izuku would wish her luck as she would do the same. They would then go their separate ways. She was in the second group along with Izuku, so when they went their ways, Izuku would end up going to the auditorium as she would end up going to the wrong way. Izuku would end up stopping her as she was 5 feet away in the wrong direction, as Izuku would end up asking her, do you happen to be group 2 by any chance?" Izuku would say as she would nod her head. "Oh, the auditorium's this way," Izuku would say as she would quickly nod her head, giving an awkward thank you before rushing past Izuku, completely just nervous and awkward, with her face a bright red, just being embarrassed by her mistake. So with that, we now see Izuku walking over towards the auditorium as well, as he would end up sitting down in one of the seats, as we end up seeing after 5 minutes Present Mike, the loud hero, step up onto the stage. "Good morning, UA entrance examinees. Hi, I'm Present Mike, one of the teachers you might be seeing here at UA if you happened to making it. So, anyway, let's begin with the written exam. You all will have a long 5 hours to complete this 10-page exam. So, I suggest you get to it. I'll have these helpers pass out the exams. Once you get your test, you may begin," Present Mike would yell. Izuku would receive his test from one of the volunteer helpers, as he would then begin, finishing it in a cool 4 hours before many of the other examinees that happened to be there. However, there was one black-haired lady that had managed to beat and pass the exam in under 3 hours. Izuku would be shocked at the level of brilliance so he had managed to do it in. However, Izuku wouldn't be able to just ask her how smart she happened to be, and wouldn't even see her for the rest of the exam, as she would end up finishing it, turning it in before walking out in a hurry towards another part of the UA campus. So once the 5 hours would end up being up, Izuku would end up seeing all of the tests be passed back to the front if they hadn't finished it in time, so Present Mike would end up beginning the hero examinee, or the hero exam, just talk and explaining it all, saying that there's going to be 3 types of robots: a 3-pointer, 2-pointer, and 1-pointer. And they're going to be different levels of difficulty, how many points they go up. However, a shiny blue-haired boy would end up standing up before yelling at Present Mike, "Wait, Present Mike, on this pamphlet here, it's that there's another 4th robot. I'd be extremely ashamed if such a prestigious school managed to make a mistake on such an easy task," he would say, flicking the pamphlet in his other hand. As Present Mike would just look down, wanting to keep that robot a secret, but now couldn't, just hoping to keep the UA reputation. So Present Mike would end up saying, "Oh, yes, that's the 0-pointer. It's mostly just a distraction, so I'd say just to avoid it. You really don't have to beat it. It gives you no advantage or points at all. So just avoid it," he would say, as the blue-haired boy would sit down, as the rest of the examinees would end up being funneled into just a hallway where they would end up just being seen by the other people that had just finished the hero exam. However, these people would end up being flooded in from the entrance since the hero exam was only 30 minutes long. All of these people finished it way early since it's only 30 minutes, and so they had to go home and then come back for the 5-hour long test. So we now see Izuku standing in the hallway as the doors and gates would end up slowly coming to an open. Izuku would end up rushing out before getting out his demonic katana. As Izuku would say, I guess this is now a good time to use it. Shakily, Izuku would end up slashing the katana as dark energy would end up seeping out of it and would end up consuming the one of the one-pointers completely whole. Izuku would be completely in shock at the power of this sword before putting it away, not wanting to hurt anyone else. Also, Izuku had used up half of his power doing that, as it was insanely hard to handle. So with that, Izuku would end up just punching robots from there, as his defense and resistance stats were quite high. Izuku had used many of his special coins on his defense/resistance stats, as it was quite hard to level that up compared to intelligence and strength, as those you could do push-ups or read a book, but he didn't know quite how to do the defense and resistance, not wanting to be punched every single day. Sure, he could do that, but that can only go so far. So Izuku punching these robots would end up doing that, as he would end up just easily getting around 50 or so points punching these robots, as all of a sudden he would hear a cry for help. As the ground would start shaking beneath him, he would look on it to see a massive zero-pointer towering overhead. As Izuku would end up looking on in complete shock, he would end up sprinting on towards the zero-pointer, getting out his demonic katana, knowing he wasn't going to be able to defeat it just with a punch. Izuku, with his demonic sword in hand, he would rush over, still barely being able to wield the sword with its immense power. As he would rush over to where the zero-pointer was, he would jump up using his immense strength, lifting up the sword above his head, striking it down. So with its immense speed and quickness, Izuku would easily be able to slice through the zero-pointer, so the demonic energy would start to expand rapidly before consuming the entire zero-pointer whole. However, as Izuku reached the ground, he would instantly be knocked out just from energy loss, not having enough energy to remain in consciousness, as the limp Izuku body would lay down on the ground, as Chaco Uraraka would barely be able to push the boulders off of her leg, not having enough energy to use her quirk even, as she would end up walking over towards Izuku, who was quite just immense and just didn't have any energy at all, as she would look at him hoping that he wasn't dead, as he sure looked like he was. Recovery Girl would walk over towards Izuku, as she would see just the crazy Uraraka eyes looking down at what she presumed to be the dead body of the person that she had met earlier and who had saved her, as she would end up being crying, just hysterical, hoping that Izuku wasn't dead, as Recovery Girl would just knock her on the head with her cane. "Calm down, child. He's not dead. I've seen this many times before. He's simply knocked out. He just used all of his energy saving you. So I suggest once he wakes up, you pay him a visit. You sure owe him one." Recovery Girl would say, as Uraraka would hurriedly nod her head as Recovery Girl would then point to the exit, saying that the entrance exam was over and that she should leave. Izuku would wake up 30 minutes later in a hospital bed, just resting, so he would end up getting up as Recovery Girl would walk to his side. "Stay down, Izuku. You used up so much of your energy using your power of yours, so you got to rest. I'm not letting you go home until the morning." Izuku would look at her, before just pushing her aside, not too rough though, as Izuku would end up getting up out of the bed, standing up, and walking to the door. Recovery Girl would try to stop him, however Izuku just wouldn't budge, continue on walking, saying that he has to get home, as his mother's making one of his favorite meals tonight, and he can't miss that for the world. So Izuku would push past Recovery Girl before walking back to his house. However, as Izuku was walking, he would bump into the same brown-haired girl he had rescued, as he really was only focused on the food that he was going to receive once he made it back to his house, as a sort of congratulatory gift for making it into UA. That's just how confident Inko Doria was that her own child was going to make it into the school of his dreams. So, as Izuku of the past Recovery Girl walked down halls, he would end up bumping into Ochako Uraraka, as she would end up saying, "Oh, hello, Izuku. I'm sorry that you having to save me caused you to get hurt. It's really my fault," she would say, as Izuku would only just laugh. "Oh, it's no problem, Uraraka. It's my fault for being so stupid. I probably should have just run in and saved you, pushing the boulders off your leg, and then ran out, instead of dealing with the entire zero-pointer by myself," Izuku would say, as Uraraka would only just laugh. "Yeah, that might have been the smarter decision, but you were acting on impulse and only had a split second to think. I don't blame you for the decision you made," she would say, as Izuku would only just laugh more. "Well, I guess I'll be seeing you, Uraraka. By the way, why'd you come into UA? If I can recall, you're not in the school yet. You were in the same entrance exam as me," would say, as Uraraka would all of a sudden start blushing embarrassed. "Oh, it's nothing," she would say, as Izuku would just sort of nod his head before walking out, as Uraraka would walk slowly behind him, as they would end up going out the same door, Izuku holding the door for her, as she would end up thanking him, blushing profusely once again, as Izuku and her would end up splitting their separate ways to go off to their separate houses. Now, Izuku would end up getting his favorite meal, as 2 weeks would end up passing, and once these 2 weeks would pass, a letter in the mail would end up arriving. Izuku would be sitting at the dinner table eating some breakfast, sitting at the dinner table eating breakfast. He was sitting at the dinner table eating dinner. I don't know why. So he's sitting at the dinner table eating dinner for like the second time for some odd reason. Inko ends up coming back from getting the mail, as Inko would hurriedly rush into Izuku, pushing past chairs before handing him a letter shakily. "It's from UA," she would say, as Izuku would look calmly towards her before getting the letter and opening it up, as a small disc would end up falling out as a hologram would end up playing. "Hello, Izuku Midoriya, and what I'm assuming to be the Midoriya family. Congratulations, Izuku. You made it into UA in the top hero class for the first years, Class 1A. Congratulations. I'll see you in a week. There should be a box arriving any minute now that has your UA uniform. I suggest you go look outside your door." Inko would look on towards the front door, quite confused. She was just out there. There was no way a package could arrive in such a split second. As she would end up walking to the door, she would shakily open up the door cautiously, slowly opening up the door, winding its hinges, putting it all the way back, as she would then stare down at a box that was now on their front doorstep. Inko would look on in shock, and so would Izuku, who would more be intrigued than shocked in anything. Izuku would walk over, picking up the box, before picking up his shocked mom, putting her down, and shutting and locking the front door, as Izuku would end up putting the box to the side, opening it up before looking in to see that it was his UA uniform. A week would pass, as we now see Izuku walking in to UA, as we Izuku sitting in his desk on Class 1A, just waiting for the teacher to arrive. Slowly, 1 minute would pass, 5 minutes, then 10, and then 20, and then 30, and then an hour. The teacher was quite late, and the classroom was still bustling. Everyone was talking, having conversations, and Izuku would end up just wondering where the teacher was, so he would end up just slamming his head down on his desk, as finally everyone would just stop talking and would end up looking over, just confused at what Izuku had done. As Izuku would lift his head up, and all of a sudden the teacher would open up the door. Hi. You guys took quite the long time to quiet down. The longest ever, actually. Make that a UA record. Well, hopefully you all learn your lesson by next class and you won't be yelling for over an hour or in 10 minutes. But anyway, thankfully, that green-haired fellow over there happened to slam his head down on the desk in annoyance of me. So anyway, let's begin. I'm your new teacher, Shota Izawa, of Class 1A. And so, let's begin. I'm going to be doing just a quirk test for you all, just to see what your true potential is. So, put your PE uniforms on and walk down that way, so we can begin just testing your quirks. I'll see what your potential is, and if you don't have the potential to be a hero, you're going to be expelled from UA. Many of them would look on just in shock, not wanting to be expelled from the school of their dreams. So they would all hurriedly go grab their PE uniforms, rushing down to the locker rooms and get changed before rushing off to just testing Site E, the one Aizawa had told them of. As they would all be sitting there, Aizawa would slowly walk in, with Izuku slowly walking back behind him. Izuku had taken his time and really didn't care if he was late. Aizawa didn't mention he'd get expelled if he was late, so who really cared? Izuku get there as Aizawa would end up looking back behind him. Alright, you, Izuku, I think your name is. You're the first-year representative. So, why don't you go ahead and throw this ball and just show us what your quirk is? Izuku would grab the ball in his hand before stepping into the circle as of Aizawa's directions. Izuku would raise the ball above his head before winding his arm, holding the ball back behind his head, launching it into the near distance after exploding his arm forward. As the ball would rocket off into the sky, Izuku would see the ball go good 400-500 meters. Izuku and where used his full power, but it was still above 50%. Izuku didn't want to get expelled, however he didn't want to waste his energy just blowing it all out on the first exam. So Aizawa would look at it before looking down at just a certain device. Great job, 500 meters. Alright, next please. Izuku would go on to do fairly well in just all of the tests, and that's mostly due to Izuku having a strength quirk. Sure, there was some tests based on just speed and other things, like the ball test or a race, that Izuku wasn't going to win against someone who had mobility that could make them fly off, say Bakugo Katsuki. However, he was still going to be top 5 or top 10, and Izuku would end up finishing as a top 3 contender, getting second place because of all the high placements and just having a average of being top 5, and almost no one else could say that. For many of the tests, they'd get either in top 10 but not top 5 or something other than that. So finally, everyone would be dismissed after all the tests were done, and just the excitement of not knowing if anyone was going to be expelled would end up trying out with a couple of short words from Aizawa. Yeah, no one's gonna be expelled. You all have potential, I guess. You all can go home now. He would say in a cold voice that just didn't seem to be there. He was as if sleeping while talking. Sleep talking, basically. As this would be happening, all of the students would end up going home as a month would end up passing. They would all just go by with some basic training exercises, but it had nothing compared to their first hero class that just happened to be today. As all of them were stretching in their seats, just wondering who their hero teacher was going to be, all of the sudden stomping would be heard from down the hall, as they would then see a fist smash through the door of Class 1A, shattering it into tiny little pieces of wood. As there stood in the doorway was a shining yellow golden figure. "It is I, All Might," he would yell, as the entire class would look on just as if sparkles were in their eyes. There stood in front of them was the #1 hero. They all just couldn't believe it. There stood the #1 hero right in front of them. It just didn't make any sense at all. They just never thought they'd be able to meet someone with such a high caliber that was All Might. It was crazy, many of them would think to themselves. As All Might would end up laughing before telling all of them to quiet down and calm down. Calm down, class, calm down. Sure, it may be the #1 hero, but it's thing to be so excited about, I'm sure. So, let's begin with today's assignment, your first hero class. And that just happens to, we're going to be doing a Heroes vs. Villains assessment to see your thinking skills as a hero. Sure, you've done some simple tests and classes before in training. However, this is nothing like you've ever done before. We're going to be doing things like this every single day, so you better be prepared for it. All Might would say as if the class would look on, just wondering what was going to happen, as if All Might was hyping up some basic form of training. All Might would then get out sort of a remote from his pocket before clicking a massive red button, as all of the sun briefcases would slowly come out of the wall. As with a device, they would all see just these briefcases with their desk numbers labeled on it. Since the support course is so nice of them, they just happen to make your hero costumes based on the basic design that you had submitted to them. Of course, you're going to be able to change it later on, but for now, this is what you got. All Might would say, as you then see all of them grabbing their suitcases and going down to the locker room, getting changed, as they would then just get changed in their hero costumes before going off to wherever All Might had told them to meet. As we then see All Might standing there right by just the Heroes vs. Villains just city building, we would then see Izuku Midoriya walking down before meeting up with All Might along with the rest of their class. Alright, let's begin. So, a new special thing that Nezu decided to ask me to do is the Class 1A and first year representative against a team of 4. Since they're so good, let's see what they're capable of doing. So, Izuku, are you up to this task? All Might would say as if edging Izuku on, knowing that Izuku's going to say yes. Izuku wouldn't want to be just one person that would say no to it, so of course Izuku would say yes. Alright, sure, I guess, he would say, as All Might would then laugh, saying, great. Would say as we now see Izuku pitted up against Bakugo Katsuki, Tenya Ida, Ochako Uraraka, and Momo Yaoyorozu. Quite the team of heroes. As Izuku would be said that he is going to be the villain that has just the task of just maintaining the security of the device. As this would be happening, Izuku would place the device up at the top floor, as he would then think for a moment. He still has 2 minutes and 30 seconds to hide the device. Why doesn't he go and hide it in some far-off location that they're not going to just be able to get to if they climb up to the ceiling or roof? Izuku would grab the device before placing it into a closet, as All Might would end up be watching this along with the rest of the class over cameras. Quite the smart move. He knows if he's going to leave the device, someone might go up to the roof and break in and easily be able to disarm the fake device. So it's quite good that he managed to hide it on his own. Wasn't thinking anyone actually would think of that today, All Might would say. As the round would begin, Bakugo, Uraraka, and Ida would all go in as Momo would stay behind, still thinking of part of a plan. She had told the 3 to go ahead, as she was going to be thinking of a plan if anything must be done on the back or just outside of the building. She would end up thinking about it, wondering, well, the smartest move would be to hide the device all the way up at the top, meaning it'd be the farthest to reach through the door. So, what if I just did this, she would say, getting sort of plunger hands was allowing her to climb up the side of the building before making it up to one of the windows, creating a staff before shattering the staff with a metal rod, or the metal rod staff, shattering the glass before walking in to the top floor, seeing that there was no device there. She would wonder where it must be before knowing if the 3 of her teammates are going in from the front and Izuku was facing them, she could get a just behind the attack or surprise attack from the behind. So she would end up doing this, walking through the halls with the metal rod in hand, going around corners, slashing away, just hoping if Izuku was standing there, she'd hit him with a lucky headshot. We cut down to the bottom floor where Izuku would end up meeting Bakugo Katsuki, Uchaku Uraraka, and Tenya Ida. Izuku knew that it was going to be a hard fight, and if Izuku wanted to even have a chance at beating them, he was going to have to take out the strongest first. So instantly, Izuku would end up creating a distraction, grabbing a couple of smoke bombs that he was able to purchase from the item store with very little cost. They were quite cheap and only cost around a couple of coins. However, it only had a limited, just a permanent stock, so Izuku could only purchase them for a limited amount of time, along with a limited number of them, hence why they were so cheap. So with Izuku luckily being able to purchase the entire stock, which was only around 10, Izuku would throw one down, creating smoke everywhere. Bakugo would create an explosion in his hand to sort of light up the area, with smoke end up going around it, causing a smoke spiral around his explosion. Izuku would rush in as his face would come into view through the explosion, as also would his fist, punching right through the explosion, catching fire before Izuku's fiery punch would smash right in at the skull of Bakugo, sending him flying backwards, slamming into the doorway that he had just entered. As Izuku would land, both Ida and Uraraka would look on in shock before Izuku would flip around, kicking Uraraka right in the back, right in the side of the skull, as Ida would be there, would try to do a kick at Izuku, propelling himself forward using his just engines on the back of his just calf, as Izuku would slowly go right under it before punching Ida right in the stomach, cracking Ida's armor in that area. Izuku had upgraded his recently unlocked agility as of level 50, and had gotten it to quite the level. So with Izuku having quite the high agility, he was easily able to move with such precision, like being able to kick and be able to dodge something so quick. Bakugo would get up out of the rubble, completely now in anger, and how dare someone be able to punch him like that, or be able to get away with it, he would say to himself. Jumping up, he would rush over to where Izuku was, going for an explosion, however, morphing it into a punch. However, Izuku would dodge this, seeing something like that coming before punching him square in the stomach, much like he did to Ida. Bakugo, however, wouldn't be sent flying back, now having a stronger hold on his feet, as would end up going for another punch with his other hand, sending an explosion right towards the side of Izuku's head, who would barely manage to duck under it, with a couple of the top strands of hair on his head just being scorched by the explosion. Izuku, now down on the ground, going down, Izuku would propel himself forward, using his legs, putting his hands above him, with both of his hands going right directly into Bakugo. As this would be happening, Izuku would see Bakugo go up, smashing through the ceiling of the second floor, as Izuku now sees Ida getting back up with few tiny pieces of his armor shattering off. Ida would rush in before punching Izuku square in the face and then kicking him right in the leg. Izuku would feel some sort of pain from this, but it wasn't quite the strong blow. Izuku had quite the high defense. Izuku would dodge another one of Ida's attacks before sending a punch right into Ida's helmet. However, it didn't do as much as the armor down on his stomach, as that was kind of the weaker armor, so that he was able to move easier. Izuku would end up punching Ida once again, and would end up tying down Ida, who was lying on the ground, as Ida had gotten quite tired from his rapid punches and using his engine quirks to get up and fly towards Izuku. Izuku noticed that Uraraka, Bakugo, and Momo were all strangely absent. Sure, Izuku sent Bakugo flying up into the second floor, but he should have come down by now. And where could Uraraka be? Izuku would say, as Izuku would end up Knowing that they probably snuck off behind him to go look for the device, Izuku would rush past them. However, Izuku knew Bakugo wasn't going to get a cheap win, in Bakugo's words, by simply touching a papier-mâché device. So Izuku knew Bakugo was probably going to be waiting for a cheap shot, hopefully just trying to take Izuku down in one blow from around a corner. So Izuku would go in preparing himself for anything, as ended turning the corner, seeing sparks flying, as there stood the glooming figure of Bakugo with an explosive hand barreling on down towards Izuku. The hand would make contact with Izuku, sending a massive explosion right into him, as he would end up going right into the wall behind him, as Momo would end up coming up out of nowhere, tying Izuku up, as that would end up being the match victory. As All Might would end up seeing this, would end up telling them to untie Izuku, and for all of them to end up coming back towards where all of them were located at. So with them all walking back, they would finally go back there, as All Might would end up asking anyone how come Izuku was to lose, even though he's the first-year representative. Izuku would end up actually speaking himself. Sure, I may be strong, but going in a 4-on-1, it may not be fair, but yes, the world and life isn't fair. However, it still would be insanely difficult, even at high level of strength, and it's to defeat a 4-on-1. Sure, I may be able to pick off a couple of them, but eventually I'll just get overworked and tire myself out, or do something stupid, having to deal with so many people, that I'll end up getting captured or knocked out and defeated. So, the odds of winning with a 4-on-1 are quite high. That's why numbers usually are the best. However, they might not always be the best if you're not just knowing with a plan, or if you're just going in blindly. All Might would nod his head, agreeing. Yes, that's true, Izuku. A 4-on-1 is always one of the best scenarios you can get if you don't have enough heroes. However, if it's a 10-on-1 and it's a stealth mission, that's not quite the best sort of thing, as that's quite the lot of heroes having to deal with, and chances are you're going to get captured, or just get noticed with that many of heroes. So, anyway, why don't we have the next group of heroes, or hero wannabes, step up and prove yourself as heroes, All Might would say. Now, a couple of weeks would end up passing, as all of the students would walk in again, as it was finally another super exciting day, since one of the first exciting days, besides the first day, being the Heroes vs. Villains, or their first hero training class. So they would all walk in just super excited, knowing that today was their field trip to just the rescue training and just scenario and arena training for heroes, and how to rescue different civilians and victims and all of that, as finally they were going to be going on to one of the many crazy field trips that they would be going to throughout the year. As we'd be sitting there, Aizawa would walk in with the Hero 13, who just happened to be the keeper of the USJ, to make sure that everything remained running and in good condition. As All Might would also step in there, who would then say sadly he wasn't going to be able to make it, having to do a couple of hero work and hero missions. However, he was going to be able to make it around halfway through, so he can't wait to see you all in action once again, even though he's seen them in action quite a lot over the past weeks because of him being their hero teacher. So, with 13 explaining the USJ, they would all be sent walking down, getting changed into the locker rooms into their PE uniforms or hero costumes, their choice of course, before piling onto a bus. As Izuku, along with his class, would end up getting onto the bus, as all of Class 1A would be piled up onto this bus, the Hero 13 would continue on with her speech about the USJ and all of the things they would be doing in the USJ. So, as that would be happening, the bus would speed off towards the dome-shaped building, as it would then slowly come to a halt, as all of the students would pile out of the bus, much like they had just in reverse from the start of the day. As they would all march up the massive setup stairs, 13 would end up pushing open one of the large double doors, revealing a massive complex of different types of arenas and scenarios that they'll have to go through if they end up becoming and choosing the job of being a hero. So as all of them would look on in pure amazement, they would all step forth before 13 would lead them down the stairs, just showing them the different types of just areas and things that they were going to be doing. As she would end up showing them, there's the water place or the flood place. That just happens if you're in, say, an ocean or a flood happens and there's tons of water. There's the fireplace, an earthquake place over there, an air place, cold place, or something like that, or tornado place. There's all sorts of different types of places here that's going to get you whipped up and able to train against all different types of scenarios. She would proudly exclaim before walking everyone back over to the fountain. However, right in front of them, not even 5 feet in front of them, a massive purple portal would end up accumulating out of nowhere, as hundreds of villains would end up stepping out, as finally 3 other people would finally be there at the end. A blue-haired figure, a massive bird monster, and a purple portal-looking thing that had presumably gotten them there. Shigaraki would look on just right in front of himself, seeing all of the heroes standing in front of him, as Shigaraki would rush in, going right after Izuku, reaching out a hand towards him, as if about to use his quirk. Aizawa was about to jump in front of him, however Izuku would hold out his hand, halting Aizawa in the process, as Izuku would clench his fist before punching the oncoming Shigaraki. However, right as he was about to punch, his fist met with something else, something that just felt like it was meant, like he hit a tree, a solid just tree. As Izuku would look on, there stood the massive purple monster towering over him, much like the zero-pointer. Izuku would look on, Aizawa would do something, going in, kicking the Nomu right on the head, however it didn't budge at all. The kick did nothing towards the Nomu. As Izuku would stare up at the Nomu would screech out before slamming a punch right into Izuku's skull, sending him flying backwards. Kirigiri would end up telling Shigaraki to make the Nomu stop before speaking. "Well, it appears we didn't calculate you being this close. Why don't I go ahead and make you a bit farther where we calculated you'll actually be?" Kirigiri would say, creating a portal underneath them all, making them all fall through the portal before falling into their separate zones. However, Izuku would be falling down against a building, where he would see massive amounts of villains all surrounding him, as Izuku would end up seeing smoke all above him, as he would realize that he was in the fire zone and that a fire had now started. Izuku, feeling heat surround him, would end up jumping up, punching a villain, as Izuku would realize even his classmates were stronger than these guys. These guys had absolutely no training at all. They were quite the weak villains, just your low-life thugs. You could possibly just find out in the middle of a street doing something stupid or idiotic. Izuku would continue on punching them before fighting his way through there, as he would end up meeting up with a couple of his classmates who would terrorize through the fire zone or making it back towards the middle, where they would see their own hero teacher destroying an army of villains, decimating them with ease. As finally the blue-haired boy standing there that looked like was only a couple years older than them would finally speak once again. He would reach out his shaky hand before pointing his curled-up finger at Aizawa. "Nomu," he would say in a scratchy voice. "Kill him, and then kill those UA brats," he would say, now clenching his fist in anger. As Aizawa would end up sort of recognizing the voice and finally getting a good look at Shigaraki, he would realize who he was. He would yell out, "Shigaraki! Stop this!" would say, as Shigaraki would only shake his head. Shigaraki would look down at Aizawa. However, Aizawa had said his real name and not the fake name that Shigaraki and All For One had come up with. Shigaraki, however, wouldn't care, shaking his head, saying, "Oh, the person you speak of is long gone now. I go by Shigaraki now," he would say, as Aizawa would then get his face smashed in by the Nomu. Izuku would run past all of the other villains that were still there. His classmates would try to stop him, knowing that if Aizawa wasn't able to take down the Nomu, none of them were going to be able to. Even though Izuku may be strong, he wasn't strong enough to take out something that could take out their teacher. As Izuku would rush in, he would punch Nomu with his hardest hit, as the Nomu would end up going back just a couple of feet. However, it didn't budge much, so the Nomu would end up sending a flurry of punches barreling on towards Izuku. So Izuku would be pushed back and back as he continue on with these rapid amounts of punches. Izuku would wind his fist back once again, punching the Nomu square in the gut before rapid punching it, much like All Might, as the Nomu would end up screeching out, not in pain, but in victory, knowing that it had won this fight, and that its opponent and foe was weak. So it would end up reaching back his fist, punching Izuku square in the head, much like he had just a couple of minutes before all of this happened. Izuku would be sent flying back, shattering into the fountain, as water would end up falling down onto his face, waking him up, as his eyes would end up opening instantly, stepping down, pushing aside the different types of bricks and just rubble that surrounded him. He would rush over, punching the Nomu repeatedly, knowing that he had to keep it at bay to hopefully save his classmates, or at least until All Might had arrived. Oh, it just happened to be the day that All Might just had to be late, so you could think. Punching the Nomu repeatedly, what for the Nomu was only toying with Izuku. Izuku would finally jump back, deciding that it was time not to waste any more of his energy, getting out his demonic sword, as his arm would be clenched, as he would also be clenching his teeth in pain. The power surged in him, however, Deku didn't have enough energy to wield the blade. However, some of the demonic energy would seep right into Izuku's hand, going up his arm. Like sort of a demonic fire, a black fire had started consuming Izuku's arm whole. As Izuku, now wielding it with such ease, would slash the Nomu's arm, easily cutting the Nomu's arm off as it would fall down to the ground, with the arm then being absolutely just consumed by all of the demonic energy. Shigaraki would look on in complete shock, seeing that the Nomu wasn't regenerating at all. How could this be possible? The Nomu has a regeneration quirk. How could it be possible that it's not regenerating? He would think to himself, as he sees Izuku slash up at the Nomu once again, cutting off its other arm. As Nomu would screech out in pain, as the demonic energy would end up flying up, consuming both of its arms very slowly. However, all of a sudden, Izuku would drop his blade before falling down to his knees, as the demonic fire that consumed half of his right arm would just completely vanish. Izuku would hold out his head in pain, screeching out just a scream of complete agony. What had that fire done to him? What has this katana, this demonic blade, done? What had he done to himself? Knowing that he must save his classmates, he had done this to himself. What could that blade have done? He would merely think. As Nomu would screech out with the demonic energy now being gone, its arms would easily regrow. The Nomu would then screech out before rushing over towards Izuku, punching him square in the head, sending him flying the other way before meeting Izuku's jawline with the Nomu's other hand, uppercutting him, slamming his lower jaw into his top teeth. So he would be sent flying upwards. The Nomu would jump up, now clenching its fist, slamming him down onto the ground. As Izuku would still get up again, as the Nomu would screech once more. As this was about to happen, Bakugo Katsuki would come out of nowhere before exploding the Nomu, just keeping it back. as Bakugo would try to yell to get Izuku out of there, for he would shakily get up, his feet wobbling in the process. He was still barely able to use any of his energy. As Bakugo would be yelling for this, all of a sudden his head would be grabbed as he would start to struggle, grabbing onto the Nomu's hand, trying to get to the Nomu to let go. However, the Nomu just wouldn't. So it would up dangling Bakugo's body. He was trying to struggle against him to let go of him, over towards Shigaraki, stomping over towards him, as Shigaraki would smile. "Ah, yes. Ah, look what you've brought me. Oh, this is just great. I've seen you, Bakugo Katsuki. Seen you grow over the past couple of months at UA. You're quite the strong one, aren't you? Well, anyway, why don't you give us a show, Nomu? Do what you must," Shigaraki would say as Bakugo would be kicked up into the air, as the Nomu would jump in, punching Bakugo square in the chest, as Todoroki would come out of nowhere, slamming his foot on the ground as ice would go in, capturing the Nomu in an iceberg, as the three strongest first years, Bakugo, Katsuki, Todoroki, Shoto, and Izuku Midoriya, were now all fighting the Nomu at once, hoping to keep it back and trying to allow All Might to arrive and have enough time to get there so that all of the class could be safe and still alive when he did arrive. Could go flying in the air, the Nomu would break through the iceberg easily before looking around. It would rush over, grabbing Todoroki before jumping up and grabbing Bakugo, walking over to the already weak Izuku, who was standing there with his just hands up in a shaky and wobbly boxing defensive position. The Nomu, grabbing both of their heads, would slam the three heads together, so all three of them would end up falling down to the ground. Izuku would stand up once again while the other two were now knocked out. Izuku couldn't have an idea how he was managing to stay up and alive through all of this pain and torture that was the USJ fight. Many of the classmates looked on, just on the shadows, watching, not wanting to join what the bloodbath had begun and what Izuku, Midoriya, Bakugo, Katsuki, and Todoroki Shoto were most likely going to become. They didn't want to just get their faces smashed in. They knew they just couldn't have the guts to do that, even though there are heroes in training. Izuku, standing up, would go over towards the Nomu, winding back his fist before a slow punch would end up slowly making contact with the Nomu's stomach. However, it didn't do anything. It just slowly pushed in the Nomu as Izuku's hand clenched would end up letting go, as his arm would then fall to his side. Izuku would look up to the Nomu, would look down with empty, emotionless eyes down at Izuku. All of a sudden, a smashing fist would come right through the doors of the USJ, as there stood All Might, the #1 hero, shining in all of its glory. However, he wasn't smiling like he always was. He was frowning for one of the only times he would do this, because he knew his own students were in trouble. All Might would jump down, swooping in, grabbing Todoroki, Bakugo, and Izuku, hauling them away from the Nomu. So the Nomu would screech, not being satisfied with not being able to kill the three students. So the Nomu would then rush on towards All Might before punching All Might across the USJ. Shigaraki would look on at All Might before smirking. "Oh, I knew you couldn't resist showing up, All Might," he would say, yelling it across the USJ, making sure that All Might heard him. As All Might would jump across the USJ before punching the Nomu right up above him, so it would go right through the ceiling of the USJ as glass would start fluttering down, hitting All Might, as it then smashed against the ground. As the Nomu would become flying down, it would land, sending smoke flying upwards like just a huge cloud of dirt. As the Nomu would be seen standing there completely fine, however, it had already been weakened, as a lot of its energy had been used up healing from the injuries Izuku had given him along with All Might. Now, so All Might would wind back his fist once more, punching it right across the face, sending it flying across the USJ like it just had done to him. However, before it could land, All Might would appear right beneath him before punching him right into the air, make his trajectory, I don't know how to say it, diagonal, causing him to fly right through the side of the USJ, sending him flying into the forest behind, causing the Nomu just to be completely knocked out and not have any orders, so it would just remain sitting there knocked out, and when it would wake up, it wouldn't remember any of its orders. So we now see All Might standing there with his fist smoking. He would look on with a glare on towards Shigaraki. Glaring at him, he would jump towards Shigaraki, as Kurogiri would try to create a portal but wasn't fast enough, as Shigaraki's face would be grabbed by All Might before smashing it into the ruins of the fountain. "Damn it, Shigaraki! Why do you keep coming here?" All Might would say. Shigaraki would only glare more on towards him. You got expelled from this school, so you shouldn't even be here," he would be saying. "I can't believe a UA student actually fell so low to defect to the villain's side." Might would continue on as Shigaraki would only be staring on as All Might would then continue on an onslaught of punches. As the weak Izuku would faintly be able to open up his eyelids, as he would end up seeing All Might just completely smashing in Shigaraki's entire body, as blood just made Shigaraki's body completely coated in it. It was completely red from his own blood, as Izuku would just barely be able to stand up. Blood would flow down, crossing one of his eyes, as he would barely be able to wobbly look on towards All Might before just yelling out for All Might to stop. All Might would stop for only a quick second, looking on towards Izuku before telling Izuku that he should have no sympathy for a villain that almost killed him, punching Shigaraki right into the stomach. As Izuku would stare on at All Might, he would once again yell for All Might to stop, and it's just brutal. There's no reason for him to continue on doing something like this. As Shigaraki would finally manage to get away from All Might, as he would end up holding his head in sheer pain before yelling out that all he wanted to do was become a hero. But you, along with this dreaded school, turned me into a villain. All Might would yell that he couldn't control his actions and that he became a villain himself. However, Shigaraki would start to mention all those times All Might said he couldn't be a hero because of his quirk, because of how villainous it was. How he said it to him multiple times when All Might was there for special training days to train a new generation of heroes before All Might was full-time working at UA. Izuku couldn't believe his ears. All Might, the symbol of peace, was telling people that they couldn't become heroes all because they couldn't have a quirk, or that they had a villainous one. It just didn't make sense to Izuku at all. He's supposed to be the light at the end of the tunnel for people, someone that everyone should look up to, and yet he's not showing how bright he is predicted in the news and shown in the news. Izuku would shake his head, not wanting to believe it. Ever the times he yelled for All Might stop beating up Shigaraki for no reason made him believe Shigaraki's words. So All Might, hearing what Shigaraki was saying, would start to beat him up even harder, punching him with 50% more power than he was, as he was going easy on him from the start. Izuku managed to get up now fully, holding onto his demonic sword as just a cane, using it as a crutch to walk down the stairs that All Might had placed him up the top of. Before he would end up reaching onto All Might, the sword would end up starting to consume into Izuku, as the black fire would start to consume Izuku's right arm, giving him another huge burst of energy. With Izuku's burst, now he would fly on towards All Might before punching him with the hilt of the sword, sending him flying across the USJ, slamming into the fountain ruins. As All Might would barely get up, he would stare on towards Izuku before shaking his head. "I can't believe you, Izuku. I can't believe you're one of those villains," he would say, as Izuku would only stare on towards All Might, now in between All Might and Shigaraki, making sure that All Might didn't get in his way. As Kurogiri, who had been taken out by Bakugo, they were fighting Nomu just beforehand. He would remain knocked out as Shigaraki would look on, now barely being able to look just like Izuku had really been able to look on at the gruesome fight Might was in moments prior. As he would stare on at just the figure of Hope standing in between him and death's door. As Izuku standing there, All Might would rush in before giving a 100% full power punch right to Izuku. However, he would block it with the blades of the sword. As Izuku would stare on towards All Might before shaking his head, much like All Might had just done towards Izuku. I've lost all my respect for you, All Might. I thought you were the symbol of hope and peace. But in reality, you're just a cruel, brutal shell of someone you once were. The hero society turned into a merciless warrior, All Might, Izuku would say before punching All Might right in the gut. So all of the wind would be knocked out of him. Izuku would then slash upwards on All Might, sending a massive cut right up as blood would end up jetting out of it. As All Might would fall down to one knee, barely being able to breathe. I can't believe you defected to those villains just like Shigaraki, you'd barely be able to say. As Izuku would end up grabbing the sword once again, putting it to All Might's shoulder. However, All Might would be knocked out, falling down completely unconscious, poofing back into Skeleton Might. As Izuku ends up putting away his demonic sword and then healing All Might's injuries. However, Izuku would end up collapsing right after that, as everyone would just be in complete shock. All Might, their hero teacher, had just mercilessly beaten up a villain, almost leading him to death. They were taught not to kill villains, and yes, he didn't kill him, but it sure looked like he was about to. Everyone just didn't know what to think. Some agreed with All Might's actions and hated Izuku for what he did, attacking their hero teacher, attacking the number one hero. However, some knew what Izuku had to do in order to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves, something that a very hero would end up doing. Izuku was a hero towards Shigaraki. It may not have been in the eyes of the law, but he was still a hero to someone. As many of them would start to side towards Izuku, however, many of their opinions would be weighed in between them, knowing that both of the actions weren't right of each other. However, a lot of them were also just as shocked that Izuku managed to beat the number one hero even when he was weak. However, the huge cloud of smoke sent by some backup of the heroes managed to hide the cloud of Izuku and All Might. Right as Izuku passed out, hitting the floor, the heroes would end up bursting in, as one of them would see All Might's Skelemite form throwing a smoke bomb, as Shigaraki would only stare on at the body in front of him of Izuku, confused. A hero, someone in UA, the school he despised, heroes, someone he hated, had saved him. It just didn't make any sense to him. He just didn't understand why. Why would a hero save a villain? Shigaraki would shake his head before Kurogiri would wake up quite quickly after the heroes arrived, creating a portal beneath him and Shigaraki, now back at the villain's base. Izuku would wake up sitting in a hospital bed, breathing heavy, as he had been knocked out for two whole weeks. His arm had now gone back to only his hand was completely black, with the black flame markings right around his wrist. As the recovery girl would see that he had awoken, walking over towards him before checking out his right hand. I'm not quite sure what this is. I'd say it's possible that your power might have done this to you. But I would say this is scarring, and you're not going to be able to get rid of it. So, I'm sorry about that. I couldn't manage to just get rid of your hand for you. Anyway, Nezu wants to speak with you, she would say, before asking if Izuku was okay to walk. He would nod his head before getting up out of his hospital bed, walking over towards Nezu's office. As he would end up sitting down, Nezu would stare on towards Izuku. All Might has told me some things about you. However, when I asked some of your fellow classmates, they didn't much agree with him, saying that nothing he said happened. Do you think something could have actually happened that caused the memories to shift a little bit? Nezu would say as Izuku would just nod his head, knowing that if he didn't want to go to prison or get expelled from UA for attacking their number one hero that was uncalled for, he knew he had to agree with the vast majority that said he was innocent. So Izuku nod his head. Yeah, I overheard some villains talking about how they had a memory shifting quirk. I think they might have done that to All Might. I don't know, though. I think one of them also had a brainwashing quirk, but that might just be me. Who knows? Nezu would nod his head in understanding before thinking a little bit. Izuku would be led home, saying that he now has 2 weeks before the UA Sports Festival is set to begin. Izuku would walk into his room, sitting down to check what his level had become while he was asleep. And since he wasn't awake or conscious, his daily quest would actually end up being paused, so he didn't get punished for it. So with that, now see Izuku sitting there, as he had seen that his level had somehow managed to jump up an entire 20 levels. He had seen right before anything, that's whenever his arm went black, just barely as screen flickered right in front of him while he was fighting the Nomu, that his level had jumped up 5 levels out of nowhere. So his fight with All Might must have given him 15 levels, as Izuku was now just around level 80 or 82. As Izuku would be just thinking about the huge power boost he got, he would upgrade his agility and his defensive stat, as he knew that he was going to face much harder opponents than the Nomu in times coming. So he was going to have to get just better defense, and he would also upgrade using around 1/4 of it on his strength. He was already quite smart, so he didn't bother upgrading that at all. So he has used 1/4 or around 5 just tokens to level up his strength, and the other 15, so around 7 and 8, one of them on his defense and agility. So with this huge power boost by Izuku, he would walk into school after 2 weeks with quite the confidence boost as well. Sure, he was already confident, but now after defeating the number one hero too, when he was already weak. However, after doing that, he was quite scared of something. His sword, the demonic one at that, it scared him. And something just told him that he shouldn't use it at all. After that, as Izuku would look down at his scarred hand after using it, just knowing that something about it just wasn't right, and that it was quite a strange item too that he had somehow managed to get, by chance too. So with that, Izuku walking in, he would end up hearing that today was the UA Sports Festival. He would have ended up forgetting about it, just in all of just the thinking and leveling up with his daily quest and other types of quests. So with him there, he would be told and follow the rest of his class as they would get onto a bus traveling to the Sports Festival Coliseum. As Izuku and the rest of his class would get changed in the locker rooms before finding themselves in the waiting room, as all of a sudden Midnight would announce that they may now come out and just fight in the arena. And that's basically what they were going to be doing, but they may now come out into it and just have the crowd cheer, and she'll explain everything and this and that. So with that, they would all come out to the arena, where Midnight would explain what the first event was going to be. As sort of a warm-up round, it was going to be the entirety of all the other classes, including Class 1B, up against Class 1A, the class that had gotten the most hero training out of all of them. Many of the general courses were told that if they back out, they wouldn't be able to participate in the sports festival in the normal events, so they would decide that, fine, I guess we'll participate and probably get our butts kicked in the process. So with that, we now see a massive arena of grass be made after the podium was destroyed, as the just warm-up match would end up beginning. Izuku would start off by observing what their strategy, being all of the entire army of other students, were and what they were planning on doing. However, they just didn't look like they had a strategy at all, And so Izuku would just start fighting them, like the one Madara scene where he just completely obliterates I don't know how to pronounce it, the name, but it just continued on destroying all these kids, and Izuku would end up sparking hope that Class 1A could end up winning, or inside his own classmates. So they would end up joining Izuku, punching all of these just kids that have no hero training and mostly no fighting experience. And with the help of Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, they would end up winning. However, they were told around halfway through that they shouldn't really be going insanely hard. Remember, this is mostly just a warm-up round. So at the end of it, you had maybe 10 or 20 kids have to drop out because of them being brutally just smashed in by Bakugo, Izuku, or Todoroki, and some of the other UA students. However, everyone else seemed to be fine. So 5 minutes after that, the first event would begin, which was a race. Izuku would be seated right around the front of the race line. However, he would be moved back by one of the volunteers, saying that he had basically been the most helpful them in the warm-up round, and they used that to tell where they should place all of the students in line in the race. So with Izuku in the very back, the race would begin with the doors opening up as all of the students would rush out. Izuku would be one of them, however, he'd be in the very back. So using his intelligence, he would know that he should probably wait until the zero-pointers are defeated by Bakugo or Todoroki, who he saw just happened to made their way to the front. However, Izuku would not do this, running up ahead, finally catching up to the two his classmates that were his biggest competition. Izuku would end up seeing them easily just defeat the zero-pointer or just freeze the zero-pointer and the rest of the army of robots. So Izuku would go over to the side where Todoroki had frozen it, getting out his angelic sword, smashing it right into the ice, and using both his demonic sword and angelic sword, basically just his normal swords. However, he would use them as climbers, allowing him to climb up the ice, digging them into the ice, as he would make it up above the zero-pointer before jumping down and seeing that they were not far ahead of him. He would end up propelling himself forward, landing on one of the island rocks before hopping easily, passing them both. Izuku would end up looking back behind him as Bakugo would start to speed up before reaching on towards Izuku's leg. However, Izuku would dodge, flipping over, kicking Bakugo right in the face. As Bakugo would be holding his face in anger, Izuku would easily make it through as first place after easily crossing the finish line and crossing the minefield. Using his intelligence, he was easily able to map where all of the mines were placed due to others' footprints, along with just huge mounds of dirt sitting right on top of normal dirt, and that looked like if they were dug up or not. So with Izuku in first, Bakugo would come in second, and Todoroki in third, as many of their other classmates would end up passing as well. However, a lot of their classmates wouldn't end up passing the skills competition or just the intelligence competition, as if you were able to pass on through the first half of the skills competition, you would now have to deal with an intelligence competition, which had to do with different sorts of puzzles, and mostly just playing different types of board games, such as chess, which was basically the most boring part of the UA Sports Festival. So, since 60 kids passed through the race, they would then have the intelligence competition right after that, and which would skim down some of the students, as they should see who the smartest and strongest hero is by thinning out some of the students that don't really understand challenge-based games or puzzle-type games. So with that, Izuku would easily do quite well in that. However, he would go to the finals of the chess tournament bracket, where he would end up looking on against his opponent, being Momo Yaoyorozu. Izuku would try to beat her, however, he would barely end up losing to her, as she was the one who rivaled his intelligence the most. However, that didn't say there was other kids that were insanely strong besides him and her, there, as Izuku had nearly won almost all of his matches, going up against some of the hardest kids that all of the general courses just happened to know of. So with that, the cavalry battle can now begin, with 20 or so kids being thinned out of the competition. So that the cavalry battle begins, as Izuku would be told he is at 10 million points, not only for winning the race, but also getting second place in the chess competition. Izuku would also hear that Momo had 5 million points, and everyone else had just under 5,000 points, all the way down to 0 or 1 point. Izuku would walk up to Momo before saying that they should possibly team up, and that could possibly be useful. Momo would think about it before telling Izuku that if they were to team up, it'd be one less target for all of the people to just target for the highest points. Yes, that is true, but they can get rid of one of the 5 million. They can get rid of the 5 million point headband, as they don't need it since Izuku has the 10 million point headband, and they could easily pass with that. She would think about it for a moment before nodding her head, as Izuku would beginning after gathering Uraraka and Ida to his team as well. As the match would begin, Izuku would be staying up there waiting for all of the people to chase after him. As Izuku would see tons of people go after him, he would end up jumping up, propelling himself off of the people below him, before flipping down, grabbing a couple people's headbands, putting them around his head, and in the same time he would pull off 2 headbands. One that had just Glee that happened to have 500 points, and one that had 100 points, as he would also pull off that 5 million point. 3 headbands being pulled off, Izuku would throw them into the crowd before telling his team to run as fast as they can the other way. Izuku would look back behind him, telling them that he had happened to throw the 10 million and 5 million point headband back there. Many of them would think about it being like, why would Izuku do that? However, just the chance at 10 million points, or 5 million at that too, was enough for them all to go after them, targeting anyone that had managed to pick up the headband. And in the confusion, no one happened to look at it, so as one person would grab it, another person would, as it just so happened to be on Izuku's side that everyone was looking at it the wrong way, and so they never had enough time to flip it over and look at how many points they just so had. And so when 30 minutes would end up passing, as Izuku and his team would end up being told that they were now the first place, and that the team in second happened to be Bakugo's team with a cool 5 million, as they were the ones that came out on top with the 5 million point headband. So with that, the 1v1 tournament would end up beginning with Izuku's first match up against a mysterious Satoshi Shinso, someone that no one else knew in the 1v1 tournament, and that's because he was in one of the general courses, hoping to move up into just the hero course too. So, and Izuku would be staring at Shinso as the match would begin. Shinso would start babbling on about different types of things, insulting Izuku's classmates and this and that. However, Izuku would start to think, using his intelligence, that something just didn't seem right about him. It just doesn't seem right. His talking just seems off, like he's trying to get me to talk. As Izuku would be thinking this, he would all of a sudden get the realization that Shinso has some sort of brainwashing quirk. Izuku would rush on towards Shinso, not speaking at all, before punching him right in the gut, sending him back a couple of feet. He would get into a stance as Izuku would dodge both of Shinso's punches, as Izuku would then go for a left hook, smashing it into the side of Shinso's face. As Shinso would get on now on the ropes, having just had a full-powered left hook hit him square across the face, he would start to get just not like he was, starting to throw bad punches because he was worried he was going to lose, so he wasn't in the most focused at all. He wasn't using the most amount of his mind. Knowing that he should stay calm, he was erratic, throwing random punches just in random directions, hoping to hit Izuku just with one punch, ending crazy punches as fast as he could, which would end up tiring him out quite quickly and leaving him open. As Izuku would weave his way around Shinso's punches, he would slam his fist right into Shinso's stomach once again before slamming another left hook, the same move he had done right at the start. So feeling that he would fall back down to his butt, as Izuku would end up grabbing him by the uniform and tossing him out of the arena so that he just didn't hurt him by knocking him out. Midnight would end up announcing that Izuku Midoriya was the winner and Toshi Shinso was the loser, and that Izuku had moved on to the next round. Meanwhile, Todoroki would end up going right after Izuku, easily being able to beat Suro, as he would then moved on to go up and face up against Izuku. Izuku, now standing face to face with Todoroki, would begin stretching as the match would begin. Todoroki would begin with the same strategy that he had up against Suro, sending a massive iceberg on towards Izuku. However, Izuku would end up getting out his demonic blade, slashing upwards at it, slicing it right in two. Izuku could easily wield it now, not having the power consume half of his arm. It just felt so easy now. He just didn't know why. As this would be happening, his scar would slowly inch forward, but it was so small, the amount was basically unnoticeable. As Izuku would end up getting out his angelic katana as well, as Todoroki would launch another iceberg towards him, easily slashing through part of Izuku's skin, causing for a small cut to be on his left arm. Izuku would switch hands with angelic sword before slashing down on the cut to see if anything were to happen, not knowing if his abilities have been upgraded with the use of the sword. Luckily, the cut started to close up, and as well his scar started to move downwards, regressing from its progress where it had already been. It was a noticeable amount, but Izuku was worried about the fight, and so he wasn't paying attention. As his scar had moved down to around the base of his thumb. So with that, Izuku switched back his hands, feeling most comfortable with the demonic sword in his right hand. He would launch himself on towards Todoroki, as Todoroki would send iceberg after iceberg, which would continually be easily slashed through, causing them to split up into parts, or if Izuku just started to use the blade in quick precision, he would cut them up into tiny little ice cubes depending on the size of the iceberg. Izuku would end up getting close enough to Todoroki, he would kick him right in the chest as Todoroki would be sent flying back, catching himself using his ice. As Izuku would end up yelling that he wasn't going to beat him without his fire, and Todoroki knew this, just how easily Izuku was able to ward off all of his iceberg attacks. He knew he wasn't going to be able to beat Izuku just using that alone. So, with the hopes that he could end up winning, he would use his fire, going in for a punch, slamming it down into Izuku's blade, as he would end up blocking the punch with it. As the power would be colliding, Todoroki, the immense power, would try to pull back his fist, however Izuku would continue on edging his demonic sword forward. So Todoroki would jump back with a huge wave of power would rush over Todoroki, sending him flying backwards, smashing into his ice, as Izuku would rush forward, hitting him with his fist before elbowing him right in the face, sending him backwards, and he would end up getting a ring-out victory. As Izuku standing there, Midnight would give Izuku the ring-out victory as Todoroki would be looking on towards his fireside hand. He had used his fire for nothing. He at least wanted to win if he was going to use it. However, he didn't win. Izuku would hit both of his blades away before offering a hand towards Todoroki. As he would end up pulling Todoroki up, he would thank him before walking off, as Izuku would be announced was in the semi-finals up against Tenya Ida. That match went way easier than his match against Todoroki, as Ida would end up going in for a kick on Izuku, as Izuku was able to block it with his forearm before sending Ida back with no balance. Izuku would grab his neck after Ida had fallen down to the ground, as Izuku would drop him off in the grass, causing Ida to have just a ring-out loss. And with Izuku now in the finals, he would be staring face to face with basically his biggest rival, being Bakugo Katsuki. As Bakugo would stare on towards Izuku, the match would end up beginning, as Bakugo would launch himself towards Izuku, much like Ida had. However, he would send explosions to alter his direction, making his direction erratic and that Izuku couldn't predict it. As Bakugo would end up gripping the ground, running around before exploding off in a different direction. His entire movements just seemed like a complete animal. It was completely unpredictable, and Izuku would only stand there in his stance. However, all of a sudden, would end up having the urge to take out his demonic sword, knowing something was about to happen. As Izuku would slam the sword down onto the ground, the demonic essence of it would end up just draining down into the ground. As all of a sudden, Izuku would take out the sword once again, as a spike would end up jetting right out of the ground, right where Bakugo was. As he would slam into it, he would try to explode it, just destroying it with an explosion. However, it would remain still, not even having a scratch or just a damage mark on it. As he would look on, just confused, as that was one of his most powerful explosions, Izuku would come out from the other side of the spike before slamming his sword into the side of Bakugo with the dull side of it. As Bakugo would go flying, his head would hit the side of the spike before another spike would come protruding right out of the other one, slamming right into Bakugo's hand, going right through it. As Bakugo would try to get off, the spike would start to spread throughout Bakugo's hand, keeping him there as he just couldn't move. He would try to move even further, however, Izuku would end up punching Bakugo again and again until he would end up being knocked out after around the 5th punch right to the face. As Izuku would put the demonic sword away, the spike would slowly start to disappear before easily jetting right back up, stronger than ever. Izuku would look on just in complete shock and confusion. How was it still here? He had put the sword away. Izuku would get out the angelic sword before slashing right through the spike, so the spike would end up disappearing after that, having been slashed by the sword. Izuku would look on towards the unconscious Bakugo's hand, where a hole was. He would slash the hand with the sword, causing Bakugo's hand to end up being healed. Izuku would be announced that he was the winner, as we now see Izuku standing up on a podium, that he was the winner of the UA Sports Festival, getting a gold medal, as Bakugo, who had awoken moments prior, would be given a silver medal, and Tenya Ida would be given the 3rd place medal. So with that, we now see Izuku walking back to class after being dropped off by the bus with the rest of his classmates. Izuku would be seated in his seat as all of the sudden Nezu would walk into the room as all of the classmates were sitting there, as Nezu would hand Aizawa just a massive stack of papers. Aizawa would look through the names before passing out all of the papers towards Izuku, as now Izuku staring on just towards his huge list of papers. He was honestly quite confused on who he should choose, knowing that this was the internships that he was going to have to choose if he wanted to continue on his heroing. It was a required thing for him to do. So he looked throughout the list and would just think, the hell, Endeavor's agency is pretty much the biggest agency on here. Guess I'll choose that one. Izuku would say, checking it off before handing it in. Izuku hadn't gotten much just internship requests. Many of the heroes and agencies watching it, sure, they liked how powerful Izuku was, but they were scared of Izuku's power, as it had just pushed everyone watching it off. It made everyone feel off and scared. The power was completely demonic, and Izuku, who, having seen the spike jet out, just confused of the power, but going along with it during the fight, was even more confused. He would also be scared as well. he couldn't control the spike at all. Just the sword was controlling his hand to slam it down into the ground. It was like the sword was telling him what to do. Sure, he can easily wield it now because of his high level, but something about that sword, it just didn't sit right with Izuku. So Izuku would put that sword back away after looking at it one more time, before saying that he never could have done the quest that given or he never should have done the final quest that had given him enough coins to end up purchasing that sword. However, he was stuck with it now. He couldn't just throw it away, so he would decide to not use it unless he absolutely had to, as he still had the angelic sword, and he was still just getting just new powers from it, as he could now heal any type of wounds with it if he wanted to. So that we now see Izuku walking into Endeavor's agency with Todoroki along with Bakugo, who all three of them had gotten internship requests to go do an internship / work study with the hero Endeavor. As they would all be sitting there, Endeavor would start to explain some of the basics of being a hero, as would then be introduced to all of Endeavor's sidekicks, including Burnin, as it would just explaining this and that before Endeavor would tell them that they are now going to go off on just villain hunting to see whether they can find any villains or not. This would continue on going on for a week, as finally the last day of their work study / hero internships would end up arriving. They had captured many villains with the help of Endeavor. Well, not really. Endeavor would end up leading them to just sort of a crime scene where he would take care of the worst villain there or the strongest villain there, while the three of them were just there to deal with the lesser villains or the just thugs that were left behind of a mastermind villain that had tried to do something stupid. So, all just standing there as now a gang of three along with Endeavor running around the city just looking for different types of things that they could possibly find. Endeavor had given them all just temporary 24-hour hero licenses, deeming them that they were worthy of just going around hero hunting for as long as they possibly could if they so chose. So as they were all rushing around, Izuku would end up splitting up, saying that it'd be more effective if they would end up splitting up and trying to find as many villains as possible. So Bakugo would end up going off in a direction, right as an explosion would end up coming off right in Bakugo's direction. However, Izuku would be so far away that all he would see was a huge cloud of smoke pop up and the ground would shake a little bit. However, Izuku just thought that Endeavor and Bakugo probably handled it, as it was in the direction of where those two happened to be. However, Izuku would end up landing down in the middle of an empty and abandoned street. He would look around quite confused before he would end up staring on to see a black-haired figure in a robe standing right in front of his path. "Hello, Izuku Midoriya. The boss has spoken of you. Why don't you go ahead and come with me?" The dark, shadowy figure standing across from Izuku would finally reveal their quirk, as a bright blue fire would explode out from their hand, revealing their face. It was one of the villains named Dabi, who had been seen interacting with the League of Villains. Izuku would assume with the League of Villains, however, he wouldn't care that, as he would rush in, punching Dabi in the gut. However, Dabi wouldn't react by this before slamming both of his hands right into the sides of Izuku, sending fire barreling down to him, burning Izuku's suit, or the sides of it, that is. Izuku would jump back, wincing in pain from the burns, before jumping right at Dabi, punching him right across the face, before getting out his angelic sword while his hand was down by his side, slashing at Dabi, a cut mark going right across his cheek, going down to around the top half of his chest. As blood would slowly start coming out of it, Dabi wouldn't end up caring before punching Izuku square in the chest, punching him across the face, and then punching him once again. Izuku would dodge many of Dabi's punches, however, before or grabbing his sword with his one hand and his other, slamming the side of the blade right into his eyes, as the blade would end up marking both where his eyes were, as end up jumping backwards, holding his face in pain, before opening his eyes back up, jumping right back at Izuku. However, right as he was reaching out for Izuku to blast him with blue fire, Izuku would slash upwards with his sword as Dabi's hand would fall down to the ground. So Dabi would look at it just in shock. He'd pick up his hand with the other one, throwing it at Izuku, causing a distraction, before with his other hand he would slam it right into Izuku's face, sending tons of fire right into Izuku's face. Izuku would wince in the pain once again, would yell out, as he would jump back before cutting himself with Angelic's sword, causing for his wound on his face to heal along with the other burns. Dabi would end up looking at Izuku's wounds were starting to heal before he would just end up laughing. I'm not gonna deal with you right now. So, Izuku, the boss, Shigaraki his name is, he said he wanted to speak with you. I'm guessing you're also curious, and you want to speak with him too, don't you? I've heard about the incident at the USJ. So I presume you want to speak more on him, about all of the things he's possibly yelled out there, don't you? Izuku would nod his head, sensing that there was no killer intent in Dabi, and so he would decide to follow him, as Dabi would end up with just having Izuku follow him where the League of Villains hideout was. As Izuku would end up making it there, Izuku would end up just listening through Shigaraki's story. Ah, I see, Dabi, you were able to get him here. That's quite good. I believe you've managed to get him all the way over here. Well, anyway, so now, Izuku, I'm presuming you wonder why I yelled out that all I wanted to do was become a hero, aren't you? Well, the sad truth is, I wanted to become a hero. However, I was expelled from the high school that you go to now. Our principal expelled me after I badly injured someone. It wasn't my fault, of course. The teachers said for us to go all out, and so I listened to their instructions. And when I did an injured student, even when I stopped when they told me to, they still didn't care and expelled me. And now you're probably wondering about what All Might was saying, huh? Well, throughout my time at UA, and even a couple months before then, I remember All Might telling me that with my villainous quirk I could never become a hero. So why not show All Might? Show him that I'll become what he said I'd be. Just a villain. Because I'm just a villain in his eyes because of my quirk. Because my quirk is who I am, apparently. Izuku would look on intently at Shigaraki, nodding his head. Well, that's quite the situation you got here. Izuku would look on towards Dabi before asking him why he's in the League of Villains. Dabi would end up explaining his entire story about how he's one of the sons of Endeavor, and how he's just being scarred by him for Endeavor overworking him a ton, and his flames would burn him, and this and that. Izuku would just be confused. The top two heroes have blemishes on their career, and quite the severe ones too. The number one hero who says anyone can be a hero has just told someone they couldn't become a hero because they don't have a heroic quirk. And Endeavor, the number two hero, had just had one of his own children run away? How come he's never heard of something like this in the news? It just was so confusing. Who was just confused how the heroes were able to get away with hiding all of this information that could take them down, and yet it was all hiding right under the public's noses. Suku's there would end up hearing Shigaraki speak once again. So, I was intrigued why you managed to fight All Might and somehow be able to defeat him. Because you don't want us villains to die, huh? Well, even though you had sympathy for me. Why? Shigaraki would say as Izuku would look towards him. That's, quite the question you asked, Shigaraki. It's because why would he could have easily captured you, yet he chose to brutally beat you up for no reason at all. Just the fact that you were there and labeled as a villain, and you saying that you wanted to become a hero and how he told you could never be a hero, it just threw me off, and so I decided I'd try to do something and stop him. Shigaraki would nod his head before thanking Izuku, as Izuku would say that it's best if he were to go, as he can't be caught here at a villain hideout, and he doesn't want to be expelled from his just a dream school of UA. Izuku would leave the villain hideout, just more confused than anything about how all of those heroes were able to just get away with all of this stuff that just seemed like they shouldn't be able to get away with. And the fact that these huge, high-leveling and high-ranking heroes at that, too, were able to get away with it, it just boggled Izuku's mind. It didn't make sense to him. So while all of this was happening, he is Izuku walking back throughout the city, as he would end up seeing cop cars rush down the street in a familiar direction. It was the direction that Todoroki had gone in. Izuku would start to follow the cop cars, where he would be led into an alleyway, where he would see Ida being lifted up into an ambulance, while he would see Todoroki being bandaged up, talking to a couple of police officers. As moments before, Todoroki had found Stain right about to kill their classmate, Tenya Ida. He had managed to stop Stain enough, and the fight would end up beginning between him and Stain. However, he would just decide, after being on the ropes with Stain constantly on the attack, to just freeze him entirely and just have to deal with property damage, as the Todoroki family was quite the wealthy one, and they could easily deal with all of the property damage, so it didn't really matter to him. And Izuku would walk up to Todoroki, asking him what he had done. So he would just explain that he had managed to defeat the hero killer Stain, and that Stain was, however, taken away by a Nomu, one of those Nomu-looking things, as that villain called it. It was flying, so I guess they have flying Nomus now. And it just grabbed him and flew off. I wasn't able to get him when they were trying to tie him up. So sadly, the hero killer's still on the loose. He would say, as Izuku would only nod his head. Yeah, that does suck. Izuku would say, as Todoroki would nod his head. Yeah, it does. There's really nothing I can do about it either. As that would be happening, we now see Izuku walking over and sees Bakugo just talking with Endeavor. Izuku would ask Bakugo what he had done, as he would then explain that he had an encounter with a bunch of Nomus, and with Endeavor, they were easily able to defeat all of them. So, as all of that would just be happening, and with all of the explaining, we now cut forward 2 weeks, as it is now the final week, or finals week for the UA students. As they would all walk in, it would end up being given their written exam, as they saw would watch over them, making sure that they didn't cheat. As they would all doing that and not cheating, knowing that if they were caught cheating, they'd have to go through tons of summer school. So would just go through the entire 10-hour test, which was long, grueling, and painful. However, they were easily able to get through it. It was just quite boring. So with that now finished, we now see Izuku and the rest of his class getting their hero costumes on so that they can begin with the final exams, as Izuku was going to be pitted up against All Might. Since Izuku and Bakugo were the 2 strongest students as of the sports festival, they were going to go up against UA's just the strongest teacher. So as Izuku and Bakugo would be walking over to where they were going to begin their final exam against All Might for the year, Izuku would end up explaining to Bakugo how they need to have a plan. Bakugo would agree with Izuku, saying that they should possibly go in it together, or they should try to just have someone go for someone to throw off All Might, who say someone's right in the middle of the road, but they're not the real attack. It's only to throw him off so someone can go up and just get him from the behind, which would be a lot easier than facing him full on. Bakugo would nod his head, saying that plan could work. However, they'd have to be insanely quickly they'd have to work insanely quickly if they wanted to manage to defeat All Might. So with that, they would end up stretching before being told to walk into the city. As this would be happening, all of a sudden, a shining golden figure would come raining down from the sky before slamming a punch right at the feet of Bakugo, as it would then grab Izuku by the neck, twirling around, slamming him into one of the buildings before going right after Bakugo. Many of the students and their classmates would look on just in shock. It was like All Might wasn't going easy on them at all, even though they're still students and first years too. It was just merciless. They couldn't believe it. How could All Might be doing something like this without feeling any regret for that? Nesu would also see All Might looked like he was going 100% and would end up telling All Might to settle down. However, All Might had taken out his earpiece as it had been blown up by Bakugo, who had started to struggle. As All Might be doing this, would end up hearing Izuku coming from the behind, as he would end up kicking around, punching Izuku right in the chest, sending him flying backwards. Izuku would say that he had enough of this, and forgetting about all of his ideals belonging to the demonic sword. Getting it out of his inventory, he would now wield it in his hand before walking it towards All Might, as the edge of the blade would hit the ground, creating small cracks within the concrete, as the essence would slowly seep into the cracks, as all of the sudden Izuku's arm would end up just going completely black, as his completely black and scarred right arm, now Izuku's eyes would go bright black, or a dull black. Izuku had a complete enough of being beaten on by All Might, and Izuku could tell the intent of All Might. All Might wasn't doing this just to teach them a lesson. He was doing this for some sort of sick twist or sick joke that he likes or something, to beat up the people. Is this why he became a hero or something? Izuku just didn't understand it. So right as Izuku would lift up the blade, he would snap his fingers on the left hand, as spikes would come protruding out of the ground, breaking up the concrete along with many of the buildings on that street. As these huge spikes would end up digging through the ground, as Izuku would be sitting on top of the spike, completely losing all of his ideals and just everything, his mind entirely within this sort of mode, having enough of being beaten by someone who would just kill off a villain and not think twice about it. As this was happening, these spikes would stop right in front of All Might, as stairs would be made. Izuku would walk on the stairs, as All Might would end up jumping forward and going for a punch. However, a spike would jump up, blocking it from hitting Izuku. Now, that's not very nice of you, All Might. Why don't you go ahead and chillax a little bit? Don't you know you should wait until someone reaches the bottom of the stairs before attacking them? No? Well, who cares? Izuku would say, as the spike would end up falling down, as Izuku would jump off from where he was on the stairs, punching All Might square across the face before grabbing his sword, lifting it up, slashing upwards on All Might, seeing a massive just strike and slash right through half of All Might. As the cut was deep, All Might would grip his stomach in pain, or Izuku would end up punching All Might square across the face, as he would then fall down to both of his knees, completely weak by Izuku's attack. All Might, when will you learn your lesson? Izuku would say before kneeing All Might right in the head before capturing All Might using the cork-canceling tape. As all of the sudden, all of the spikes would end up protrude even bigger as the demonic sword be put away, as it was as if Izuku was fighting to get back into his body, or something. Izuku would end up breathing heavily after coming out of that mode, as he would pull out the angelic sword, throwing it at the spikes, as it would then end up dispersing. As Izuku would walk towards All Might with the angelic sword, All Might would yell for him not to slash him, you villain. However, Izuku would slash All Might as all of his wounds would be healed. Izuku would glare down at All Might, and before telling him that he shouldn't be judging others just by some random thing that happened to be done. You know that, All Might. You're a hero. Why you happen to yell at anyone who's a villain who comes at you with a sword, huh? I mean, sure, you have the right to assume things, but I'm a UA student after all. You don't have to be so crazy all the time, and even going so far to say that I'm a villain to Nezu. You're quite the strange one, All Might. I've lost all respect for you. Izuku would say as his eyes would flicker black right as Izuku said that one sentence before going back to his normal green. As Izuku would be walking back, Bakugo and Izuku would be congratulated for being able to beat All Might, as All Might would stand up before walking back over towards where Nezu was. As All Might walked there, Nezu would hit him on the top with a cane provided by Recovery Girl, yelling that how stupid was he, going 100% full power on a kid. Just didn't make sense. He would say, oh, I wasn't going 100%, Nezu. I was just trying to show him no mercies. It was like a respect thing, showing that I was still going 50% power. As respect, it wouldn't be so respectful if I was only going 1%, would it? He would say as Nezu would only glare at him. Shut it, All Might. You know what I mean. As the rest of Izuku's classmates would end up going, many of them would end up passing, succeeding, while many of them would also not end up passing. As we now see Izuku stretching in the middle of his room before going out to meet the rest of his class in a mall. As Izuku would end up doing that, would end up just sitting down, not really having anything to shop for, as it was merely just to get together with the rest of the class after they had a week break since finals had just finished. And so they had a week break before the summer training camp did end up beginning. So that Izuku would be sitting there as all of a sudden a hooded figure would end up sitting down next to Izuku. Hello, Izuku. I wish to speak with you again. Ah, Izuku. I've been meaning to speak with you about that training camp you've been thinking about going on with the rest of your class. Well, I know you have no choice in going to it, and you have to, but I just want to tell you something. What is that, Shigaraki? Izuku would ask, questioning on towards the villain in front of him. Well, all for one, my boss. He's ordered me that I capture at least one of the students to use as a hostage. And I just so happen to have an idea to limit any bloodshed, as I still do have a deep hatred for All Might and heroes. But there are quite a few good ones, and I could say I still have the hope to become a hero. Well, I still have the want to do that, rather. So, hopefully there's a small chance Nezu will let me back into UA. Maybe the criticism won't be as bad as he thought. Izuku would look on towards Shigaraki, or thinking for a moment. That could possibly work, but I'm not quite sure. Maybe if you team up and try to defeat All for One, that could possibly make you seem like a hero that just was misunderstood to the public. That could also work well. Could also spark hope in just the minds of children everywhere that have villainous quirks, or that the people and peers around them have deemed them as. Shigaraki would look on towards Izuku before nodding his head. Alright, so I guess I'll take you as a hostage, huh? Shigaraki would say. Izuku would stare up at the sky for a moment before nodding his head. Yes, that makes the most sense after all, he would say. Shigaraki would then walk away. Uraraka would come over towards Izuku before sitting down next to him, she would then point at the figure who was disappearing into the crowd of the many people surrounding them. Hey, Izuku! Who was that? She would say, flicking her wrist, as her index finger would now be pointing at the shadowy figure disappearing into the crowd. Oh, I don't know, just someone who wanted to talk to me. It was kinda weird, but can't really judge people on how they act or dress, I guess. He would say, as Uraraka would shakily nod her head, kind of confused at Izuku's demeanor and just attitude. As the night would come to an end, a week would pass as we now see Izuku walking into school before getting onto a bus, where that bus would then take Izuku along with the rest of his class into just a massive mountainous complex, where there was tons of mountains everywhere, while also tons of training facilities varied on the different levels up on the mountain. As it had the fire facility just in a dirt patch, so if fire were to escape, it wouldn't catch fire to any of the trees. Or there was an ice cork facility, wind cork, just for all the different elements, and then a special cork facility, strength cork facility, all these different types of facilities to make sure the students have just the best form of training possible. However, as all of the students would be looking out, seeing all of these complexes in the near distance, all of a sudden the bus would come to a screeching halt, as Aizawa would then kick all of the students out before they would then tumble down the mountain, where they would see 4 heroes along with our teacher Aizawa, making it 5, standing up above them. Aizawa would point off in the direction of the training camp, telling them that they now have to get over there, and that this is their first type of training. Of course, it would take a long-ass time to get there, as it just was insanely long. They had to climb through trees and mountains just to get to a training camp. Yeah, this wasn't going to be easy, or it's not getting any easier from here, most likely with the difficulty going up from here. However, hopefully, they at least get some time to rest. However, they would not, as weeks would end up passing of constant training every single day. They would just keep on training their quirks, trying to make their quirks better and better, along with trying to find just special abilities or super moves that they can use to easily take out an opponent if it proves to be too tough for them to fight it on with normal techniques. So finally, the last day of the training camp would end up arriving. We see all of our heroes in training sitting around just eating dinner, as all of a sudden some of them would start to smell smoke. It smelled like something was burning. They would look over the tree line, where they would see smoke fuming into the air as blue fire would spread rapidly over the tree line before making itself present to all of the UA students. They would all stare just off in shock as Izuku would stare at it intently, realizing that it was Dabi's flames. Izuku, staring at it, would then see many of his classmates get up, looking around just in panic, as Aizawa would lift up his arm, signifying for all of them to stop panicking. Calm down, class. You've all trained for this. You shouldn't be so scared of an inner-villain attack. I know if you have flashbacks USJ, but you can't be thinking about that right now, Aizawa would say, as all of a sudden Dabi would come flying over the tree line before smashing his head right into Aizawa's skull. As Aizawa, having just been headbutted, would fall back down to the ground, would erase Dabi's quirk. However, Dabi would then just fall down into some sort of sludge. It wasn't a real villain. As if the students would then end up getting separated by Kirogiri, and within an instant, Izuku, being separated, would end up falling through the portal as well. As some of his classmates, seeing that happen, they would just wonder. Many of them also going through the portal would think they were being kidnapped. However, once they would be on the other side, spread out throughout the forest, they would realize that Izuku was nowhere with them. So when they would all meet up in a group again, they would ask where Izuku happened to be, and he was nowhere to be seen. He had been kidnapped by the League of Villains. Many many of the villains would even make it themselves known that Izuku had been kidnapped by them. Oh yeah, the boss. He said he needed just a hero in training for us to kidnap and use as a hostage. That green-haired boy, he would work perfectly. I just wonder where he happens to be. Any of them would say heroes as if it was like a script. However, we now cut to Muscular, one of the more sketchy villains that just blatantly didn't even agree to the terms that the League of Villains had set out, only going there to hopefully try to injure some students, as we now see him standing over a small Hota, as he would be staring up, just scared, wondering what was going to happen to him, as all of a sudden Bakugo would come flying out of nowhere, slamming his palm into Muscular's face, sending an explosion causing Muscular to recoil back, before flicking his head back down, staring right at Bakugo. Ah, damn it! How dare you! He would say towards Bakugo. Bakugo would only smile, hoping that this fight with Muscular was going to be a good one, as he would rush over towards Muscular, punching him across the face before sending an explosion right into his gut, sending Muscular flying up into the air, which then smashed Muscular right down into the ground. 30 minutes would end up passing as both Muscular and Bakugo were tired, so Muscular would end up slumping down to the ground onto one knee, hoping to take a breather, as Bakugo would end up rushing in, giving his last explosion he could manage right into Muscular's face, sending him flying over the edge just of the cliff, as he would barely manage to grab onto one of the tree branches, saving himself from any further injury. As 30 minutes would end up passing, we now see All Might there at the UA training camp. We cut this Izuku's tied up in a chair, as Shigaraki would then ask if Izuku was willing to join the villains, just so All for One would get off their back about the hostage situation. Izuku would stare evilly towards Shigaraki before smiling. Oh, what an offer! I suppose I could join, but what's in it for me? Izuku would say as Shigaraki would stare down towards Izuku. Well, I've seen that All Might. He's been just bombarding you, saying that you're a villain. So why don't you prove him right? Izuku? Shigaraki would say as Izuku would stare up, smiling with an evil grin at Shigaraki. Okay, sure. As of the sun, Izuku would smash out of just the restraints, as they didn't turn on the quirk canceling aspect of them. As would see this, Izuku would smash Shigaraki's skull in, however, it wouldn't actually be real, all staged while they were just on the other side of the city in the mountains. All for One would see this, creating a portal, hoping to go through there and stop Izuku from doing anything, as for One would come through the portal, as Shigaraki would jump, propelling himself forward, slamming his hand into All for One's helmet, disintegrating it. All for One would look up, throwing Shigaraki off of him right into the glasses behind him in the bar, as Izuku would jump in after the distraction caused by Shigaraki, punching All for One right in the gut. So he would end up spitting out some blood. He would look on towards Izuku before throwing a punch with one of his many quirks on towards him. Izuku would end up having the punch slam right into the cheek, as he would be thrown right back into the wall, as he would end up standing up, staring off towards All for One. Izuku would reach down into his inventory, grabbing out his demonic weapon. Staring on towards All for One, Izuku would slash the ground as black sludge spikes would end up propelling themselves out of the ground right on towards All for One. By now, helicopters had already arrived, as half of the building had been destroyed, along with a ton of other buildings behind it due to the black sludge. As we now see All Might along with the rest of the class staring at the TV screen, as All Might would see that All for One was fighting one of the Class 1A students. He would end up jumping off to hopefully go and join the fight, hoping that Izuku wasn't going to die. However, Might was still kind of confused. Izuku was working with All For One, at least in his mind. He was a villain after all, since he did have a villainous quirk. There's no chance he became a hero with that demonic weapon of his. Would think, even after he did end up hurting me too. So we now see Izuku slashing the ground even more, as black spikes would propel themselves right out of the ground further, as Dabi, Shigaraki, and Toga, along with Stain even, would use these spikes with the help of Izuku to get closer and closer to All For One, just bombarding him with attacks, as one of them would attack before peeling off, as another would end up attacking, giving All For One no time to retaliate, as this would continue going on. All For One would barely be able to stand after a while, as Izuku would end up walking towards All For One with his angelic blade in hand. I'm gonna make you feel even more pain from this, Izuku would say, before winding back his angelic sword and slashing All For One, causing all of his injuries to end up being healed. All For One would smile, staring down at Izuku, calling him naive and a fool. So he would wind back his fist, going to punch Izuku. However, Izuku's demonic blade had just taken action, slamming itself right into All For One's suit, tearing it, causing it to rip, as the sword would inject itself right into the middle of All For One's stomach. His head would shakily look down to the blade as his hand would slowly grip onto it, trying to shatter it. However, it just couldn't. Izuku would open his eyes, now glowing black, as a black aura would end up flowing off of them like an endless fire. Izuku would start twisting his blade, spinning it endlessly, before pulling back his arm, causing the blade to go out, as there was now a perfect circular hole within All For One. He would hold just this hole shut, hoping that it would end up healing. However, it wasn't, as this aura that Izuku had and was flowing off of his sword had embedded itself right into All For One, so it would end up spreading, causing this black flames to end up going all throughout All For One's body. Izuku would put his angelic sword back, and with his other hand not holding his demonic sword, he would close his fist insanely fast, as All For One would then explode, burning up into a black flame, as All Might would then end up arriving, punching Izuku right across the face. Izuku would end up looking up at All Might, just wondering why he had done that, as now the rest of Izuku's classmates, seeing for All Might's punch Izuku, were confused. Izuku wasn't a villain, but yet he was working with these villains to defeat All For One. What had happened? They needed answers, but it looked like All Might was going to try to kill Izuku. They couldn't let this happen. Many of them would jump off, rushing off towards the fight, as Izuku, sensing that they were coming, would hold off All Might for the time being, as finally his classmates would end up arriving. Right as All Might was going for another attack on Izuku, all of Izuku's classmates would end up arriving along with Nezu, as they would start pleading with All Might, even Bakugo and Todoroki holding him back. However, he would push them off, yelling that they need to stop interrupting with this hero business, as he would wind back his fist before he would hear the striking voice of Nezu. However, it was already too late. All Might had started to use the last embers of One For All in this punch, hoping to stop Izuku, who he had believed to be working with All For One, and this was just a ploy by using the League of Villains as well to make him look like even more of a hero. However, just him killing All For One there, All Might knew All For One couldn't be dead. He wasn't that weak, as All Might just thought of Izuku as some weakling, someone who's below him, as this All Might was nothing like the canon All Might from My Hero Academia. This All Might had been twisted by the heroic world, twisted by all the fame, money, and power that he had garnered from all of the years he'd been in it from saving everyone. So this had caused his mind to end up being twisted, going after Izuku. As Izuku would end up seeing All Might go after him, he would get out his demonic sword, slashing upwards, blocking All Might's fist. As this would be happening, a striking amount of power would be sent flying back at All Might, causing his arm to end up dropping down to the ground before burning up in a just pool of black flames. All Might would look on before seeing that his right arm had been completely just chopped off. It was completely missing. However, before Izuku could get his angelic sword out, it would end up being tackled by the number 2 hero, Endeavor, as Nezu would end up walking up to who, before telling Endeavor to put him in handcuffs and to put him into the back of an armored vehicle, and that they'll take them to UA campus to speak with him. As this would be happening, Izuku would be seen in the armored vehicle, sitting down with his head up against the window, staring outside as he would just look at all of the things the car would end up being passing. Meanwhile, all of the other villains would end up being taken into custody as well to just stand trial. As we now cut weeks in advance to show the trial of the villains, Izuku is just that conversation with Izuku and Nezu had passed, but I'm not going to be talking about that just yet. We see all of the villains standing trial as they would end up pleading, saying that they wanted to nothing more than to become heroes, but they were cast aside by society, all because they had a villainous quirk. However, the jury, everything had been biased, paid off by some of the top upper-ranking heroes, such as Endeavor and All Might, not wanting these villains to become heroes, knowing that anyone who had a weak or villainous quirk that had been bullied or cast aside was bound to become a villain, and there was no other path for them to take. Just cause this to happen would cast them aside, throwing them in jail for life sentences. Some of the lackeys even getting worse punishments for some odd reason. That's how they being thrown in jail for the rest of their life. We cut back to Izuku, an hour after he'd been thrown in the back of an armored vehicle. We now see Izuku sitting in a quirk-canceling room as Nezu would end up walking in. Izuku would be staring over at Nezu before asking him why he was just stationed across from him and all tied up. Nezu would look blatantly at Izuku before sighing. Well, because of All Might's extreme influence, that's why. Look, Izuku, you're one of the smartest, my favorite students here at UA. But if you were to continue here, I'm afraid we might lose All Might's backing. And that's just something I can't risk. Izuku would look blatantly towards Nezu with sort of a glare, would just shake his head more. Look, you're not going to go to prison, but it's safe to say your hero dreams are basically done for. Because of that attack with All Might and how you injured him, the public just doesn't know what to think of you. Many of them watching the sidelines were on their TV watching the news. They saw you defeat the villain, they saw you kill it, but then they saw All Might come in and start attacking you. This made a perception change of them thinking you were a hero, stopping for one from when you killed him and they were unsure, for then All Might showed up and started attacking you, causing them to believe that you were just another villain that All Might was bound to defeat. Not only that, you managed to defeat All Might by chopping off one of his arms on live television. I'm afraid to say that you just can't become a hero with that reputation anymore. Could cause you to get a bad reputation, along with All Might yelling for you to be put to rest in a prison or just sentenced to death because of what you've done to him, saying that he was right all along, that you were just another villain. And I'm sorry, Zuku, but we just can't have a murderer here at UA. I'm sorry, but you're expelled. Nezu would say. Izuku would calmly look over towards Nezu, putting his elbow onto the table. I understand, he would say, as Nezu would look over towards him with an intrigued look, as Nezu thought Izuku would be a little more upset by this, but yet his voice echoed just an aura of calmness about it. Izuku staring on towards Nezu before getting up, as all of a sudden all of just the chains around Izuku would disappear. He would end up walking out. After his fight with All For One, having defeated both him and All Might basically at the same time, that had garnered so much XP that Izuku was now the max level he could possibly become, as his stats were near maxed out as well. However, it was all for nothing, as he was destined just to become another ordinary civilian, but yet having such a powerful quirk. As Izuku would step out of the UA campus, staring up at the sky, he'd be happy that he was free, but yet at the same time he was sad. It felt like his destiny had just been crushed under someone that was just a pebble in his own path. Izuku just couldn't understand it at all. Izuku would be walking the rain and would start pelting him as clouds would form, pelting him with rain. Izuku would look up as raindrops would hit Izuku's face, draining off of it, falling down onto the ground. Izuku would sort of chuckle to himself, saying that it was only fitting that it would start raining on this day. Izuku would sit down at a bus stop before going into a bus. The bus driver would recognize him, saying that wasn't he the kid that had managed to defeat one of the villains and even All Might? Izuku would look at him blatantly before saying that it's a long story. As Nezu would begin a campaign to just erase all of the All Might fights that Izuku had, just completely erase it from the internet, and his campaign would prove to be successful with the help of the support classes. With Izuku now erased, only having just very essence, the deep web of Izuku beating All for One, Izuku started to become a nobody, with very few people even knowing who he was. Sure, sometimes he'd just get a sense of nostalgia and go outside dressing up in a dark trench coat to go out and save some people. However, Izuku would always come so close to being caught with his erupt power that just made everyone feel a sense of just being weaker than everyone around them. We now see Izuku walking on the sidewalk in broad daylight. All of a sudden, a very small, silver-haired girl would end up bumping into him. As Izuku would look down, he would end up just feeling a sense that he needed to save her. However, he hadn't done any saving or heroism for over 2 years, as all of Izuku's former classmates, former friends that he hadn't spoken to since he was expelled, had now graduated from UA. However, Izuku had started increasing just news reports about someone named Overhaul on the news, as the heroes had managed to try to attack him before, but he had managed to escape along with his hostage that he had been carrying around for years. Izuku would see the girl beneath him. She would end up looking up at Izuku just with pleading eyes. She would instantly get up after falling to the ground, just shaking her hands with a shaky voice, saying that she was sorry over and over and over again. So finally, someone would step out from the corner. "I'm sorry about that," the figure would say. Izuku would look at the figure before realizing that this was Overhaul, the person that he had seen on the news. Izuku would end up putting his hand down to his side as Overhaul would end up feeling that something was about to go wrong. He would get himself into a stance before Izuku would end up relaxing his arm, as if looking on towards Overhaul just to confirm that it was him. Overhaul would reach his hand down, grabbing Yuri's hand before tugging on it, making her go with him. So he would then turn around, walking back into the corner. As Izuku would end up turning the corner as well, now standing in the front of the alleyway. Overhaul would turn around, just looking at him in the corner of his eyes, saying that he needs to go along now. He doesn't want any problems to happen. Izuku would click his demonic sword on his inventory before telling Overhaul that he needs to let go of that girl. As he would slash, causing just a black flame to spew out as a projectile, hitting the side of the wall. As all of a sudden, a spike would end up protruding out of the wall, hitting Overhaul right in the side of the shoulder. As Overhaul would end up feeling just his entire right arm go limp after it would happen, as Izuku would end up slashing the sword 100 more times, as now these projectiles were just all over the alleyway, as spikes would end up coming all out of nowhere, protruding right into Overhaul. As this was happening, Izuku would jump in with his angelic sword slashing upwards, causing just a blanket to go right over Eri of angelic energy, as Izuku would grab the silver-haired girl, known as Eri, tugging on her hand before rushing out of the alleyway, as Overhaul would barely be able to get out, crawling out of it with blood seeping out of all of his holes. So he would end up reconstructing himself, making sure that none of those holes were there anymore. Would look over towards Izuku, who, however, the spikes would end up grabbing onto Overhaul's legs, pulling him back into the alleyway. So we now cut to see a forest as Overhaul's screams would end up echoing louder and louder. We now see Izuku standing in the middle of an abandoned house that he had conquered, as Eri was now sitting there on a bed with Izuku tending to her injuries. She would end up thanking Izuku over and over again. However, Izuku would only and he'd just say it was no problem. So Izuku would end up leaving to, just to get some lunch for him and the young girl that he had just saved. As he would end up leaving, he would end up feeling something was going wrong, much like the sense Overhaul had felt, where Izuku didn't really care, as he would end up walking out, going on trying to get something from the local grocery store. As we now see a bunch of heroes coming in, going in Izuku's abandoned house, capturing Eri, bringing her back to UA. She would end up telling the story about the person, as they would end up spreading rumors saying that Izuku had kidnapped her from Overhaul and planned to do something equally or even more cruel to her. However, she would try to stop this, but they would only say that she's just a kid and that she didn't know anything. As Izuku would be walking back with the grocery bags in hand, he would see that his house was burning down to the ground and that the ruins and rubble had started to topple over. Izuku would drop the grocery bags before staring on, walking in, pushing the broken door to the side as he ended up seeing just all of the remains and ruins of the building. He would fall down to his knees, slamming his hands onto the ground, wondering why was this happening to him. Everything that could go wrong in his life just happened to go wrong. Why him? Why was this happening to him? Years would end up passing as all of Izuku's famed memories of being a hero had just faded out of his mind. He just couldn't care anymore. He had just become an ordinary person, just with a crazy powerful quirk. Izuku would be walking down the street. He would end up encountering a young kid that looked to be wearing a UA uniform. The kid would end up looking up towards the green-haired person before their eyes would end up glowing. Wait, you're the hero that beat All for One, right? One of the worst villains of all time. I've idolized you ever since you take out All for One on the news. I can't believe I finally met you. What's your hero name? I can't believe it. You gotta be one of the best heroes, right? Izuku would just sadly look on down towards the boy before shaking his head. I'm sorry, kid, he would say in a strikingly cold voice. But the hero you speak of, they're long gone, he would say before pushing past the boy, walking on, as the kid would only look on just intently at Izuku, wondering what had happened to him. That was for sure the person that had beaten All for One. And now, with the fated dream of becoming a hero gone out of Izuku's mind, that he had now become ordinary, was now his life, and that's where this what if ends. Well, that's where the normal what if ending of this what if ends. As we now that's all the way back to when Izuku was sitting down in front of Nezu, as this is now the heroic ending or an alternate timeline. Nezu had told All Might that he needs to come in to speak with Izuku, along with a bunch of news reporters. As this would be happening, Izuku would see the news reporters come in, setting up cameras, so they would end up saying that they were rolling. Izuku would end up taking this opportunity to start to explain everything with All Might, and just yelling at him. However, before this would all happen, Izuku would get out his angelic sword, so the news reporters, along with Nezu and All Might, would end up yelling for him not to kill All Might. However, he would slash All Might, as his arm would end up protruding right back out, as his arm had been fully healed. Izuku would put his angelic sword away before staring right at All Might, before slamming his fist onto the ground in anger. All Might, I've had enough of you, Izuku would say as the live broadcasted news report would cause many people to start getting anticipation from the fury that was Izuku. They were wondering why Izuku just sounded so mad. I've had enough of you, All Might, Izuku would say. You keep calling me a villain, and yet all I've done is nothing villainous. I've done so many good deeds, and yet you keep casting them aside, saying that it's only just a coincidence, or this and that, saying that I'm bound to become a villain eventually, or that I'm just a villain in disguise. I've had enough of you. I've done only good things for this society, and yet all you do is cast me aside, saying that I'm worthless, all because I have a villainous quirk with my demonic sword, which isn't even just a big aspect of my quirk. It's just a small part of it. You've been twisted, All Might. You used to be once great hero. You're just in if your world has only been twisted by your fame and power, Izuku would say, as all of the people watching would end up nodding in agreement after remembering and just hearing all about All Might in the press conferences and his attitude and tone. They had just wondered what had happened to All Might, and yet he had just told them the complete truth. As we now cut 4 years into the future, Eri, I pronounce it Erie. I mean, I just said Arrow. I'm Erie, Arrow. However you pronounce it, had been saved from overhaul by Izuku. Gang, as All Might had basically just fallen off after just the public found out about his striking reputation. With that, no one wanted to be All Might's successor, and so the one for all quirk would end up dying with All Might. Izuku would end up becoming the #1 hero, with maxing out his stats already, and just becoming the greatest hero of all time, far better than anything All Might had ever achieved, making sure that he was a far better hero than anything All Might had ever done. Just taking all of All Might's names out of the record book, erasing him from history, basically. And that is where this What If comes to an end. I hope you all did enjoy it. Thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.